Chapter 2747. Ever since the 7 turns of the Furious River Formation was activated, Bai Jian had been feeling uneasy everywhere. Therefore, he had been suppressing his emotions, which caused his resentment and anger to grow stronger and stronger, until now he really could not suppress his heart, so he slashed with his sword with all his strength. Bai Jian did not know if this slash of the sword would be of any use, because he did not think too much about it when he attacked. Moreover, his thoughts were very simple and pure. He wanted to make a move himself. That was all. As for whether he could get the benefits he wanted, that was another matter. It was something he could not care about and was not sure about. Sometimes, the more selfless and selfless one was, the more one could display a different spirit. A slash without any distracting thoughts was also very terrifying. For a moment, the sword light was bright, and the sharpness seemed to have penetrated the formation. In other words, the small world in the formation could not suppress this incomparably sharp sword. Mo Wu, who was standing in the distance, immediately felt as if his whole body was being pricked by needles. It was very uncomfortable, and it seemed that his collapse would happen in the blink of an eye. Bai Jian was still the same. Sharpness was his synonym. Moreover, the slash he made under such circumstances was even more unreasonable. It was as if he was a freak who could break the rules and was not afraid of any restrictions. Mo Wu's body could not help but tremble, because when he felt the sharp sword essence, he seemed to see death waving at him. However, that was only a moment of uncertainty. In the 7 turns of the Furious River Formation, Mo Wu, as the person in charge of the formation, was naturally an invincible existence. No matter how stunning you are, no matter how sharp you are, in the face of the general trend, your incomparably sharp sword will only be broken. Thinking of this, Mo Wu immediately stretched out his hand. Suddenly, in the void, countless yin flames gathered together to form a palm, as if ready to catch the incoming sword chi. He used the same trick again. Back then, he had used this trick to forcefully break Princess Mingzhu's attack. No matter how sharp the sword chi was, it still needed spiritual power as the main body. As long as there was spiritual power on it, it was enough to devour it. In the next moment, the corners of Mo Wu's mouth curled into a smile. He saw that the sword chi was immediately covered by yin flame after it was grasped, and it quickly burned. In less than a breath's time, it was enough to completely erode the spiritual energy in the sword chi, causing it to dissipate completely. However, in the next moment, Mo Wu's expression was filled with shock. The spiritual energy on the sword chi was indeed destroyed by the grip, but the sword chi was not broken. Instead, it passed through the yin flame palm and continued forward. Chi. The sword intent moved extremely quickly, piercing through Mo Wu's shoulder in the blink of an eye. Bai Jian's sword was that sharp and unreasonable. How is this possible? Mo Wu looked at the wound on his shoulder, his eyes filled with disbelief. Fortunately, Mo Wu reacted quickly and dodged the attack. Otherwise, his head would have been cut off by the sword. Bai Jian stood there proudly. After his successful attack, the haze in his heart seemed to have been swept away. The strange yin flame could devour spiritual energy, but the pure sword intent could not be completely destroyed. How is it impossible? Do you really think that you're invincible just because you're a lackey? Bai Jian said coldly. Bai Jian no longer had his previous cheeky smile, and he became very serious. This battle forced Bai Jian to restrain his mind and attack with all his might. Otherwise, if there was a slight mistake, he might fall into eternal damnation. Moreover, he did not want his opponent to be more familiar with controlling the formation, so he could only attack with all his might. As long as the sword chi could hurt his opponent, everything would be fine. Mo Wu was even more depressed at this moment. He did not expect such a situation. At the same time, it made him realize that Bai Jian was the most threatening existence to him among the 3. Since that was the case, Mo Wu's goal became clear. He would kill Jade, faced White Sword first. As for Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu, they were restricted in every way and naturally could not use their full strength. Naturally, they could not pose a threat to him. After analyzing the situation, Mo Wu put his hands together. Suddenly, his hands were constantly changing, as if he was making a profound gesture. The 7 turns of the Furious River Formation did not only have this effect. It had endless magical uses and was not a joke. After feeling threatened, Mo Wu also knew that he had to take out more things to be able to take down his opponent. At least from the current situation, the other party had gradually found some feasible methods. Princess Mingzhu, since your robe is not afraid of the Yin flame, please go to the river and take a look. If possible, remove all the hidden pillars one by one. Xiaoyang said. Hearing this, Princess Mingzhu nodded and directly threw herself into the burning sea of fire. Truth be told, there was nothing too intricate about this array formation because there were many places that needed to be adjusted by cultivators. If he were to kill the cultivators hiding in the dark, the array would lose its balance and reveal even more flaws. Who knows, it might even break apart because of the imbalance. Those who were in the open must have something up their sleeves. As for those who were hidden in the dark, they were probably the most vulnerable link, playing to one's strengths and avoiding one's weaknesses. Bai Jian focused his mind and calmed his qi. At the same time, he was also preparing the second sword. Since the first sword could work successfully and injure the other party, there was no harm in a few more. If he could kill the other party, it would definitely be worth it. Although the 7 turns of the Furious River Formation was terrifying, it was not to the extent that one would not dare to attack. Moreover, as long as Mo Wu was killed, no matter how exquisite the formation was, it would collapse directly because there was no one to control it. Mo Wu naturally felt the unreasonable and sharp sword essence. Suddenly, the pressure in his heart became even heavier. Fortunately, he had already adjusted his attitude and was ready to deal with it. Ling Xiu, what are you waiting for? Go and kill them. Mo Wu shouted angrily. As soon as these words came out, countless Yin flames in the formation suddenly gathered towards one person. The speed was extremely fast, and in a short time it formed a storm. The chilling aura was also rapidly increasing. Because of this, the flow of power in the entire formation started to change. The 7 turns of the Furious River Formation had endless magical uses and endless changes. Previously, Mo Wu felt that he alone was enough, but now it seemed that he still had to divide the excess power. The limelight could not be completely ignored. Chapter 2748. As for the cultivator standing in the north, countless Yin flames were rapidly pouring into his body. At this moment, Ling Xiu was in so much pain that his face turned ferocious. Although it could be said that they had been cultivating by the side of the raging river since they were young, using the special place of this side to temper their bodies and improve their own cultivation. However, to suddenly have so many Yin flames enter his body, it was still unbearable. There was a limit to everything. Once the limit was exceeded, it would backfire and even create a huge mistake. However, Mo Wu turned a blind eye to Ling Xiu's pain as if he was not affected at all. After all, Ling Xiu was the one who was suffering now. What did it have to do with Mo Wu? As countless Yin flames entered his body, Ling Xiu's body expanded at an extremely fast speed. He was like a balloon. Bai Jian couldn't help but frown when he saw this. These fellows were really ruthless. Xiaoyang was also dumbfounded. How dare they use such a method that consumed so much vitality? Sensing that Ling Xiu's aura was getting stronger with the help of the Yin flames, Xiaoyang's guess was not far from the truth. He would have to bear all the bitter consequences of rushing the seedlings to help them grow. It had to be said that these people were really crazy. Ling Xiu was a 5th-level martial royal realm expert. If this went on, even if they won, Ling Xiu would have to pay a huge price. Good move, Xiaoyang muttered as his frown deepened. To be able to be so ruthless and decisive, Ling Xiao was definitely not a person to be trifled with. Moreover, he was ruthless and cunning. This kind of person was the most difficult to deal with. They are really generous to sacrifice a 5th-level martial royal realm expert. They are really rich. Xiao Yang sneered. Bai Jian's heart trembled when he heard this. These guys could only be described as deranged. Only these people with dark hearts would use such a method that was harmful to one's conscience. It was true that people were different in different places. These guys really had no friendship. As long as we can kill you, it is not a sacrifice no matter how much we sacrifice. If you all don't die, I'm afraid we'll all have to give up our lives here. Mo Wu said in a cold voice. Mo Wu was very clear about this. Under such circumstances, sacrifices were inevitable. However, if they could reduce the number of sacrifices and use 1 or 2 lives to reverse the situation and crush them with absolute superiority, why not? It could be said that if it weren't for the 7 turns of the Furious River Formation, the Rameau clan's forces would have already begun to fall apart and collapse. Under normal circumstances, wanting to defeat the 3 of them was undoubtedly a fool's dream. It could even be said that it was an impossible task. Therefore, this place became their most solid straw, their life-saving straw. Your companions are so pitiful, Bai Jian said as he shook his head helplessly. In the next moment, another dazzling sword light shot out. The power of this sword strike was even stronger than the previous one. Seeing these actions, Bai Jian's heart was filled with rage. Since these people were devoid of conscience, then they had to pay the price. Bai Jian was just like that. Since he encountered injustice, he only needed to draw his sword. As for the rest, it was not something he could care about. Feeling displeased, he resolved it with a sword strike. Seeing the sword light coming at him, Mo Wu immediately trembled with fear. It could be said that every time Bai Jian drew his sword, he would tremble. From the very beginning outside the Yin Flame realm, Bai Jian had crippled Mo Wu with a single sword strike, which had left Mo Wu with lingering fear. Then Bai Jian had killed the Sun clan's twins with a single sword strike. Just now, Mo Wu had the support of the formation, but he couldn't dodge the sword strike and was pierced through the shoulder. From this, it could be seen how brilliant and unreasonable Bai Jian's sword skills were. Even with the formation, Mo Wu didn't dare to underestimate Bai Jian. He even had to pay full attention to Bai Jian. The slightest mistake could cause him to lose his life and his Dao. After suffering a loss once, how could he suffer a loss a second time? At least, this was the case for Mo Wu. There was no doubt about it. Seeing the sword Qi coming at him in the blink of an eye, Mo Wu kept waving his hands. Layers of palm prints continuously appeared and grabbed at the dazzling sword light. Since he couldn't crush it with one hand, there was no harm in using more strength. Under the suppression of the Yin flame, the spiritual power on the sword light was completely consumed in the blink of an eye. However, the sword essence still existed and continued to advance. Mo Wu was infuriated when he saw that the sword light was still dazzling even though it had lost its power. How could there be such logic and such sword skills in the world? Mo Wu couldn't understand, but he didn't dare to be careless. He reached out and grabbed the sword Qi. Suddenly, he seemed to be unable to resist and was forced to take a few steps back. Under the force, the sword Qi shattered and drops of blood flowed from between Mo Wu's fingers. The pain caused Mo Wu to frown. He found it even more difficult to understand why the sword was so strong. It seemed that he had blocked the attack without any danger, but a lot of the sword essence had already invaded his body. Fortunately, the formation gave him enough confidence. Otherwise, he would have been defeated long ago. He might even have fled before the battle. "You can't do anything to me," Mo Wu shouted angrily. As long as he could block the sword essence's attack, there would be no problem. Moreover, Mo Wu also felt that the power he could control was much more than before. His power was constantly increasing, while the sword essence's power was weakening. Under such circumstances, Mo couldn't think of any reason why he would lose. As long as he didn't give the sword essence any chance and carefully calculated everything, victory would be in his grasp. Some waves would dissipate in a short time and wouldn't cause him too much of a headache. As he thought about this, Mo Wu's thoughts became even more resolute. Bai Jian shrugged helplessly. At the same time, he felt a little powerless. Even though he had used his full strength, the benefits he could gain from those two swords were so small. It would be extremely difficult to kill Mo Wu. Mo Wu was invincible in the formation. Suddenly, they heard a furious roar. Immediately, a burst of powerful energy surged forth. Xiao Yang looked back and found that Ling Xiu had completely turned into a monster under the erosion of the Yin flame. His body had expanded 10 times, and he looked like a giant. His entire body was burning with a strange Yin flame, and he looked extremely strange. The incomparably huge Ling Xiu looked majestic and invincible at this moment. Chapter 2749. Princess Mingzhu used the advantage of the robe to dive into the raging river. Although the flames were strange, they couldn't hurt her. However, the raging river had become a sea of fire. She could only enter because of the robe's power. However, when she came here, she was in complete darkness and couldn't see anything. Even the range of her senses was very limited. It was less than half a meter in radius. If her divine sense continued to extend, it would be completely burned by the Yin flames. If she lost too much of her divine sense, she would inevitably be injured. Regarding this, Princess Mingzhu could be said to be helpless. However, since she had already come down, there was naturally no reason for her to return empty-handed. Therefore, Princess Mingzhu was also looking for those people hiding in the dark. However, because she couldn't see and her divine senses were very limited, she was like a headless fly, scurrying everywhere. Whether she could find her opponent was still unknown. At least with Princess Mingzhu's current situation, it was very dangerous. If she was the slightest bit careless, she would probably be buried in the sea of fire. However, she had no choice but to continue searching. If she couldn't break this array formation, the three of them might have to give up their lives here. Therefore, Princess Mingzhu had no other choice. She wandered to many places, but she couldn't find any clues. However, this woman didn't panic at all. She was still scurrying around like a headless fly. Princess Mingzhu also knew that although she couldn't find where the other party was, she could wait for them to come to her door. After all, she was like a blind person in this place. However, to the Yin Flame World's cultivators hiding here, they were like fish in water. Once they saw an opportunity, they would definitely attack. Therefore, in this situation, Princess Mingzhu could be said to be very careful and knew what she should do. She was even prepared. If she moved even a little, the sword in her hand would slash out without hesitation. After a long while, Princess Mingzhu suddenly felt danger. He took the bait. Princess Mingzhu thought as she pulled out the sword in her hand from the direction of the attack. Immediately, an incomparably domineering sword qi swept out. A ray of golden sword qi shot out in that direction in a line. It was extremely fast. That attack was completely destroyed by the sword aura. On top of that, Princess Mingzhu was wearing a magical robe. Thus, she was able to take on the attack head-on. However, after that attack was launched, it was like a stone sinking into the sea. There was no follow-up and no one knew what was going on. Other than the sound of flowing water, there was no other sound in the sea of fire. It was so quiet that it was frightening, making people subconsciously feel afraid. Princess Mingzhu wasn't very clear about the situation of the attack just now. Therefore, she could only continue to wait. She was in the open while the enemy was in the dark. It was the first time Princess Mingzhu had encountered such a disadvantageous situation. However, she did not panic at all. Instead, she was extremely calm. Even if he was anxious now, it would be useless. Only by calming down could he find a solution. If he was constantly in a state of panic, he would definitely lose his mind. However, Princess Mingzhu didn't dare to stay where she was. She continued to wander around, trying her luck to find where those people were. In the raging river, there would occasionally be sword lights that would shine through and become turbulent. Without even looking, Xiaoyang knew that it was Princess Mingzhu who had started to use her ability to deal with those treacherous people hiding in the dark. If Princess Mingzhu could really succeed, they would have a much easier time in this battle. Looking at the huge monster in front of him, Xiaoyang couldn't help but feel a headache. Just now he had slashed out a few rays of sword qi with his sword, but they were all blocked by Ling Xiu. When those rays of sword qi entered his body, it was like a stone sinking into the sea. There was no follow-up. Now, Ling Xiu's aura was very strong. With the support of the raging river formation, his strength was almost comparable to that of a 7th rank almighty. However, this was the only time he could have such glory. When the formation dissipated, Ling Xiu's cultivation would probably collapse because of it. He might not even be able to stand in the martial emperor realm. Ling Xiu roared furiously. He was like a furious beast that had completely lost its mind. He was constantly roaring. His body had grown bigger and his strength had increased. These were things that he couldn't use common sense to predict. Now, it was as if he had become one with the raging river. There really are a lot of tricks here, Bai Jian said helplessly, not to mention that they were suppressed in the formation, now that it had created a monster that was comparable to a 7th rank almighty. How could they continue to fight? Even if they continued to fight, they wouldn't be able to gain any benefits. Xiaoyang shook his head helplessly and said, "They are just trash that God has given them a chance to eat." When Bai Jian heard this, he immediately laughed out loud. He felt that it made sense. However, when these words fell into the ears of Ling Xiu, Mo Wu, and the others, it was like a slap to their faces. "Stubborn ducks! Can you still talk big now?" Mo Wu said angrily. Xiaoyang shrugged his shoulders. In his opinion, no matter which faction in the Inflame world, as long as they could benefit from the raging river, they would probably rise because of it. As for the Mo family, they were just a little luckier and got there first. At this time, Xiaoyang was still able to talk cheerfully because, in his opinion, this formation was just strange. To say that it was exquisite, it wasn't that exquisite. It was just that these flames were like a maze that made him unable to see clearly. He couldn't break this formation for the time being. Thinking about this, Xiaoyang's heart was more or less filled with helplessness. However, since things had come to this, he had no choice but to suppress his temper and continue to observe. "What do you mean?" Bai Jian asked with a smile. Even though the current situation could be described as precarious, they were still very calm and were still thinking about how to win this battle. If they couldn't win, only death would await them. Although Bai Jian wasn't afraid of death, he didn't want to die here. It would be an extremely unlucky thing for a group of treacherous rascals to die in his hands. Moreover, the Sword Heart world now needed him to shoulder the burden. All the more, Bai Jian couldn't die here. This was how cruel the 3,000 middle worlds were. There was no way out. "Your sword can injure Mo Wu. Go and pluck him. Leave this monster to me." Xiaoyang took a deep breath, and his tone became solemn. Chapter 2750. After making up his mind, Bai Jian did not question his decision, but nodded slightly. He also understood that this was the safest way to do it. Ling Xiu had turned into a monster under the erosion of the Inflame. Even if his sword qi could injure his opponent, it would be difficult to kill him. On the other hand, Xiaoyang had learned a variety of skills and might be able to find a way to deal with him. In the next moment, Bai Jian no longer hesitated and slashed out with his sword. Since Mo Wu was the person in charge of the formation, if he could kill him, the power of the 7 turns of the Furious River formation would be greatly reduced. It could be said that this was the most straightforward way to win. The only thing Bai Jian could rely on to kill Mo Wu was his sword essence. If it were Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu, no matter how overbearing their attacks were, they were built on their spiritual power. This point was also countered by the Yin Flame. Therefore, even if they used all their strength, it would be difficult to turn the situation around. And Mo Wu's expression was uncertain because he did not expect these guys to be able to maintain their rationality in such a dangerous situation and find the most suitable way to fight in such a short time. It was beyond his expectations. However, in Mo Wu's opinion, as long as he played it safe and did not expose too many mistakes, he would still be able to win this battle. Sometimes, the greater the advantage, the more one could not be anxious. Sometimes it was easy to expose a flaw if one was anxious. If one was caught by the opponent, it would be very dangerous, because the underdog knew very well that the flaw exposed by the opponent might be the only one. Once missed, it would no longer exist. Therefore, they would definitely do their best to catch the only flaw and make it the key to victory. This was indeed very mysterious. Although it was difficult to catch that little opportunity, Mo Wu did not dare to take the risk. Looking at the bright sword light, Mo Wu's hand stirred again. Suddenly, the Yin flame in the formation seemed to be stirred up. It could be said to be surging like a storm. Xiaoyang stared at Ling Xiu, who had turned into a monster. He held the thunder, fire divine, sword tightly and frowned with worry. It wouldn't be easy to kill the monster in front of him. Ling Xiu roared and rushed toward Xiaoyang. His current fighting style was no different from that of a dire beast. Relying on the strength of his body, he wanted to do whatever he wanted without caring about anything. Xiaoyang was not afraid at all. Instead, he rushed over. 7 steps of the barbarian god. As soon as he stepped out, a huge shockwave spread out. Even the Yin flames around Xiaoyang were shattered. Although the 7 steps of the barbarian god was only a profound grade martial skill, the power displayed when used properly was not to be underestimated. In the blink of an eye, Xiaoyang appeared above Ling Xiu's head. The divine sword in his hand slashed down as if he wanted to cut off Ling Xiu's head. Ling Xiu's body became incomparably huge, and with the Yin flame's corrosion giving him strength, he also lost his consciousness. He was like a war machine. Therefore, he was unable to react to such a nimble attack. The sword fell and slashed at his neck. However, the sharp thunder fire divine sword could not advance any further. Instead, the Yin flames were like maggots that wrapped around the sword and started to burn it. Seeing that the spiritual energy on the sword was quickly dissipating, Xiaoyang's heart became even more shocked. His eyes were also filled with shock. He did not expect it to be like this. Even the power on the spiritual weapon could be swallowed. At the same time, Ling Xiu slapped over. Xiaoyang wanted to withdraw, but the sword in his hand seemed to be pulled by a strong gravitational force. He could not pull it out at all. How could they not be shocked and terrified by such a huge change? Xiaoyang's heart was filled with bitterness. This fellow had paid such a huge price to obtain such a benefit. It was truly unbelievable. However, Xiaoyang did not despair because of this. Instead, he used all his strength to pull out the divine sword and leave. Although the pulling power of the Yin flame was strong, there was still a limit. However, Xiaoyang was still 1 step too slow. Before he could leave, the slap had already reached him. He could not resist it and flew out. Ling Xiu did not seem to give up. He continued to charge forward, clenching his fists as if he was ready to kill him. The current Ling Xiu was like a demon above the raging river. He had an unstoppable aura and infinite strength. He was invincible. Feeling the tyrannical force coming towards him, Xiaoyang immediately used an exquisite movement technique to borrow the force and turn the situation around. Thunder fire sweep. With a low roar, Xiaoyang looked like a shooting star as he charged towards Ling Xiu again. Thunder and fire intertwined, reflecting each other's brilliance. The speed of thunder. In the blink of an eye, the divine sword with thunder and fire pierced the monster's throat. In an instant, boundless lightning sword qi and fire sword qi surged in like crazy. However, Ling Xiu stood there as if he did not feel anything. It was as if these attacks were just scratching an itch for him and had no effect at all. At the same time, Ling Xiu's fist came crashing down. It was as if Ling Xiu did not feel anything. He continued to attack without any fear. His attacks were extremely ruthless. The strength of each attack was not to be underestimated. If he was hit by it, he would be smashed to pieces. Seeing the fist coming towards him, Xiaoyang could not dodge it in time and was sent flying again. The punch landed on Ling Xiu's body. Ling Xiu found it hard to control his body and stumbled back a few steps. This scene showed that the current Ling Xiu had indeed become a monster that did not know pain. In fact, he didn't even know how to protect himself. Xiaoyang stood in the distance, coughing violently and spitting out a mouthful of blood. He looked at the monster-like Ling Xiu and frowned. At that moment, he really could not think of a way to deal with it. The thunder and fire sword aura were still rampaging in Ling Xiu's body, but he still did not feel anything. That's right. After being attacked by the Yin Flame, you are already a living dead. How would you know pain? Even your divine sense has been sealed by the Yin Flame, Xiaoyang muttered, shaking his head and sighing helplessly. The current situation was indeed very bad. He was completely at a disadvantage. The current Ling Xiu could be said to be a war machine. Unless he was completely destroyed, he would probably continue to fight. There was nothing anyone could do. Chapter 27:51. Ling Xiu turned around and charged at Xiaoyang again, as if he wanted to use the simplest way to kill him. As long as one was strong enough, even if one did not have any exquisite techniques, it would be difficult to resist. Moreover, Ling Xiu's advantage was too obvious, and it was fully utilized. As for the disadvantage of this war machine, Xiaoyang was clear about it, but in a situation where it was difficult to shake it, even if he knew, it would not be of much use. Xiaoyang was even more helpless about this. Although he had a lot of tricks up his sleeves, there didn't seem to be any good ways to deal with this monster. The Thunder Fire Divine sword emitted an even stronger sword light, as if it had sensed its opponent. Xiaoyang did not dare to fight Ling Xiu head-on, so he could only use his body movement to dodge, not daring to fight with him. At least for now, when he did not know how to deal with him, it would be a waste of his strength to keep trying. It was difficult for them to recover their spiritual power, and they could not even borrow the power of heaven and earth, so they naturally had to hold back a little. Even though he had already taken the elixir, he did not dare to squander it. Bai Jian and Princess Mingzhu were fighting with all their might and did not care about this, so Xiaoyang had to deal with the aftermath. Bai Jian was the one who held back at Flying Cloud Mountain. He had to keep an eye on the strongest person, so he could not attack. And now Xiaoyang was the same, so he was Bai Jian and Princess Mingzhu's escape route. They had nothing to worry about, but Xiaoyang had to. After a few exchanges, Bai Jian's sword became fiercer and sharper. Even though Mo Wu had the advantage of the formation, he was already riddled with injuries. He really didn't understand why this was the case. The sword essence of the jade-faced young man in front of him was sharp and unreasonable. No matter how you tried to break down or nibble away the power in the sword essence, without spiritual power, the sword essence could not completely break it. The wounds on his body were increasing. It was also because Mo Wu had experienced many battles with the Wanshou realm that he was able to avoid the attacks every time and not get hit in a vital spot. Otherwise, he would be lying on the ground right now. As such, the person in charge of the spirit formation knew that this sort of situation could not continue. Otherwise, if he kept letting Bai Jian attack like this, he would probably be tortured to death. This was not the ending that he wanted. I have to admit that you do have some strength. In the same realm, they are invincible, Mo Wu said through gritted teeth. This was something that Mo Wu could not understand. Both of them were fifth-order martial emperors, so why was there such a huge gap between them? From the very beginning of cultivation, everyone valued talent. Some people were destined to be geniuses, while others were destined to be mediocre and mediocre. No matter how much effort you put in, In the end, it would all be for naught. However, since Mo Wu was able to cultivate to the fifth order martial king realm, he was also hailed as a genius. However, there was still a gap between geniuses. If this were to be spread, people would find it somewhat laughable. Within the same sect, Mo Wu was suppressed by the outsider Quang Hung. On the battlefield, he was beaten to the ground by He Rin and Xing Tian. Now, with the help of the spirit formation, he was still bullied by a handsome young man. Thinking of this, Mo Wu's heart was filled with anger. He was also a genius, and the effort he put in cultivation was not lacking compared to anyone else. However, why did he end up like this? Why was he always suppressed? The more Mo Wu thought about it, the angrier he became. He could not understand. But today, all of you will die here. Become my stepping stones. Mo Wu said. He was not angry, but his voice became much gloomier. In the next moment, Mo Wu's hands began to change seals again, as if he was forming a new seal. Now, Mo Wu knew that as long as he could kill these three people, even if he had to pay a price, it was nothing. As long as he could fully display the power of the spirit formation, he would not be afraid that he could not kill them. If he continued to hesitate, that would be the real fatal point. Although Mo Wu was not sure if his cultivation would be affected by this, he knew that if he could not kill them, he would be the one to die. Bai Jian did not have so many scruples. He continued to attack with his sword, as if his opponent's words were completely ignored. Now, Bai Jian was no longer in the mood to argue. It was enough to see how much pressure he was under now. Mo Jiu, who was standing outside the spirit formation, saw the situation and shook his head helplessly. He could not help but recall that when the Almighty from the Beast Realm had attacked the Furious River, he had been the person in charge of the spirit formation. It was also because he had been in charge of the spirit formation that time that his vitality had been greatly damaged. Although he had obtained the power given to him by the previous head of the family, the foundation of his cultivation had been damaged because of this. It could be said that every head of the Mo family could control the 7 revolutions of the Furious River formation. However, every time they used it, they would inevitably be affected. Thinking of this, Mo Jiu suddenly hesitated whether some rules could be broken. A person who could sacrifice himself for the family's power was indeed qualified to be the head of the family. However, once his talent was affected, he would inevitably face a lost future. Although this child Mo Wu is steady, he is not sharp enough. However, speaking of which, his character is actually suitable to be the head of the family. Mo Jiu thought in his heart and muttered. However, this inheritance does not necessarily have to fall on the shoulders of the family head. One of the heads of the family controls the Furious River. The other takes the inheritance and concentrates on cultivation. This seems to be the way to strengthen the family. Mo Jiu said, feeling helpless in his heart. Among the geniuses of the Mo family, there seemed to be no one who could become the second in command. It seemed that all along the geniuses of the Mo family had never been a peerless existence. They had always been suppressed by the geniuses of other forces. However, since ancient times, their power and influence had never decreased. The general trend of the Inflame realm was so mysterious. This delicate balance had been maintained for tens of thousands of years. If the war had not started in the Beast realm, they would probably still be in a 4-legged state. Mo Jiu smiled. Suddenly, he felt that he was thinking too far ahead. Next, after killing these 3 fellows, how to deal with the aftermath. That was the most important thing. After all, back then, the southern forces did not perish in the Beast realm, but it was an internal scheme. Chapter 2752. Ling Xiao, who had turned into a monster, was gigantic in size and had an endless amount of energy. Plus, he couldn't feel anything, so he was extremely dominating. Because of this, Ling Xiao's speed was slow, and he wasn't very agile. Therefore, Xiaoyang was able to toy with him effortlessly in the blink of an eye. However, the pressure in Xiaoyang's heart was incomparably huge. he was also very clear that if this continued, there wouldn't be much meaning. Yet there was nothing he could do but continue to observe. Though the sword of lightning and the sword of flame had almost shredded Ling Xiu's organs into pieces, he was still acting as if he couldn't feel anything. This made Ling Xiu feel hopeless. The Ling Xiu right now looked like a living dead man. Even if they won this battle, when the spirit array retreated, Ling Xiu would most likely die a horrible death on the spot. But that was something to worry about later. Xiao Yang didn't dare to think about losing this battle. Therefore, he only had one path to choose, which was to defeat his opponent head-on. Actually, Xiao Yang had thought about getting rid of this monster, but he realized that if he was too far away, this monster would turn around and find trouble with Bai Jian. Therefore, Xiao Yang had no choice but to fight this monster so it couldn't disturb Bai Jian. However, after being entangled for so long, Xiao Yang was able to see some clues. Perhaps this monster wasn't as terrifying as he imagined. After the sword of lightning and the sword of flame were completely worn down, Xiao Yang suddenly put away his sword and turned around to look at Ling Xiu. The game of chase is over. Xiao Yang clenched his fists and sneered. Though Ling Xiu had turned into a monster, he was still a cultivator at the end of the day. His physical body was still there. It wasn't a body made of Yin flame. Therefore, he was still a living being and had a way to defeat him. Ling Xiu still didn't seem to know anything. He continued to charge at the only opponent in his eyes, fist breaking 1,000 refinements. Xiao Yang shouted in a low voice. Suddenly, he raised his will qi and covered his body with it. In the next moment, he also fell like a comet and rushed toward the mountain-like monster. Suddenly, Xiao Yang understood some problems. He felt that there were some things that he couldn't look at too one-sided. Previously, it was because he was too serious that he became a little paranoid, causing problems in his thinking. Now he had thought it through. Since your body is so strong, I will punch you one punch at a time to see how strong you are. In addition, Ling Xiu's body was already in a mess. Right now, he was only strong on the outside but weak on the inside. As long as he used a little more strength, it would be enough to destroy him. There were always more solutions than difficulties. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Yang had already rushed in front of Ling Xiu and punched him. When this punch landed on the monster's body, it was difficult for him to resist, and he was forced to take half a step back. However, Xiao Yang's attack didn't stop because of this. Instead, it became faster and faster. Xiao Yang was like lightning, constantly leaving behind after images. Every time he paused, there would be a punch on the monster's body. With such speed, Ling Xiu couldn't react at all. Now he was completely in a situation where he was beaten up and couldn't resist at all. Ling Xiu kept turning his head and attacking, but he couldn't do anything. He couldn't even touch the corner of Xiao Yang's clothes. The current Ling Xiu was only comparable to a rank 7 expert in terms of strength and power. However, in terms of speed and intelligence, he was far inferior. Ling Xiu couldn't take the beating in this area. Xiao Yang only cared about punching and didn't care about anything else. It had to be said that Ling Xiu's body was filled with Yin flames, which made his body much stronger. Even though Xiao Yang's body was very strong, the strong rebound force still made him feel uncomfortable. However, Xiao Yang didn't have the time to resolve this force. He had to attack quickly and make this monster collapse. The others were stunned as they watched Xiao Yang's body constantly change. However, they didn't dare to act rashly and couldn't help Ling Xiu. Although they were also using the power of the formation to interfere with Xiao Yang, this guy's speed was simply too fast. It was simply impossible to delay his footsteps. In less than the time it took to brew a cup of tea, dozens of punches landed on Ling Xiu's body. At this time, Xiao Yang was also out of strength. He dodged to the side, panting. Although Xiao Yang's physical strength wasn't weak, suddenly throwing out so many punches was still a little unbearable. At this time, Ling Xiu saw the opportunity and punched out, wanting to kill this exhausted guy directly. However, just as this punch was thrown out, Ling Xiu's body quickly began to disintegrate, as if it was collapsing. It was difficult to control. It looked like a small mountain that was collapsing. The powerful cultivators were also dumbfounded. They didn't understand why this was happening. Yin flames could indeed devour spiritual energy, and it was very fierce. However, it was difficult to resolve and devour the purest physical strength. This was also something that Xiaoyang had just figured out. He was never a simple cultivator. In terms of body refinement, he wasn't weak either. Xiaoyang's lips curled into a satisfied smile. He finally got rid of the first problem. Next, he had to find a chance to get rid of the remaining 2 people. Then the power of this array would be greatly reduced. In fact, he might even break down directly. Xiaoyang looked up and saw that Bai Jian was still attacking. However, his sword light couldn't hurt Mo Wu at all. This was because Mo Wu's body changed very quickly in this array, as if space was changing. Without spiritual energy, Bai Jian's sword intent was difficult to control. Therefore, it was easy to avoid. It seemed that it was more difficult to catch Mo Wu, who was more familiar with the 7 turns of the Furious River array. It was as if it was an impossible task. As time passed, Mo Wu's understanding of the 7 turns of the Furious River array had deepened. Bai Jian didn't panic, but he was a little carried away. The speed of his attacks also became much faster. Suddenly, Mo Wu stood still and roared. He pointed with both hands, and suddenly a large amount of power gathered. In the blink of an eye, 3 ferocious-looking monsters with fangs appeared in front of Mo Wu. They looked like ghosts and gods. Chapter 2753. Bai Jian looked at the 3 monsters and frowned slightly. Previously, Xiaoyang had killed Ling Xiu, who had turned into a monster, and now there were 3 more. In this way, it would be extremely difficult to get rid of them, no matter how one looked at it. As such, Bai Jian was truly discouraged. If they continued to fight like this, they would be tired out, and it would be difficult for them to kill each other. You killed Ling Xiu. This is really unexpected. Suddenly, one of the monsters spoke. As soon as this was said, Xiaoyang and Bai Jian looked at each other. This was because they heard clearly that it was Mo Wu's voice. How strange! Bai Jian sucked in a breath of cold air in confusion. This Yin flame world, no matter where it was, seemed to be filled with evil. Their methods were so strange that they had never seen or heard of it before. It was very strange. It is indeed surprising that your physical strength is so strong. However, my Yin Qi is not something that you can break with your fists. The monster standing in the middle sneered. These 3 Yin Qi could be said to be Mo Wu. He used his soul to merge with the 7 rotations of the Furious River formation. Although he did not need to inject his own soul into the Yin Qi to create it, it was only an ordinary Yin Qi. It would be difficult to deal with Xiaoyang and the other 2. However, with his soul infused into the Yin Qi, it was like the finishing touch, and it allowed the Yin Qi's abilities to increase exponentially. If they were to use normal methods to take down Xiaoyang and the other 2, it would no doubt be a fool's dream. It was simply impossible to accomplish. Therefore, even if he had to pay a price, it was worth it in Mo Wu's eyes. As long as he could win this battle, he would be qualified to seek for the future. If he could not get through it now, no matter how much he planned, it would be meaningless in the end. Mo Wu was quite aware of this and felt that he should do so. Using your own soul as a medium to increase the power of the Yin Qi, you are indeed a ruthless person. After Xiaoyang saw through the clues, he smiled bitterly and helplessly. Now it seemed that most of these people in the Yin flame world were crazy people. In order to achieve their goals, they did not care about the consequences no matter what they did. It seemed that as long as they could achieve the outcome they expected, as long as they could win, they were indifferent to the price they had to pay. As such, Xiaoyang could not figure it out. Since they were so ruthless, how could they be suppressed by the beast world for thousands of years? Many things in this, it was really thought-provoking. Mo Wu was not surprised that Yi Shiwen had seen through him. In fact, this was something that he had expected. Since Xiaoyang could find a way to deal with Ling Xiao, and even do it, it could be seen how terrifying his knowledge was. This kind of person was indeed powerful, so it was normal for him to be able to find some clues. Looking at the Yin Qi, at the same time he had a countermeasure in his heart. However, in the next moment he frowned because he realized that the Yin Qi were still absorbing the raging river's energy and were growing stronger. Bai Jian directly cut one of the Yin Qi in half with a sword. But in the next moment, the Yin Qi that was cut in half suddenly closed up again, as if it was not damaged at all. Bai Jian was about to attack again, but Xiaoyang held his hand and shook his head at him. He used the Yin spirit technique and formed a contract with the raging river. As long as the river is still there, as long as the soul does not go back on its own, it will be difficult to destroy it. Xiaoyang said helplessly. Although Bai Jian's sword was sharp and could easily cut through the body, it was difficult to destroy the soul. If it was just an ordinary soul, it would be fine. He could cut it with a sword. But the raging river gave Mo Wu some new abilities, making it difficult to target and attack his soul. Xiaoyang might have a soul cultivation technique, but in the current situation, it was hard to say whether he would use it or not. Looking at Mo Wu's body, it did not seem to have changed much. Suddenly, a woman rushed out of the raging fire at his feet. The robe on her body had disappeared, and there were still some flames on her clothes that were burning continuously. This scene caused Bai Jian's heart to palpitate even more. The one who rushed up was Princess Mingzhu. Her robe that could resist the Yin flame's attack had also disappeared. Needless to say, in the raging river, the robe had probably been burned to a crisp. This was the only reason why she had to leave the raging river immediately and come to a safer place in the air. Seeing the woman in white rush out, Mo Wu only laughed disdainfully. In his opinion, such a strategy was absurd and laughable. Now, Bai Jian's smile was completely frozen. He did not expect that they would be so stumped this time. It seemed that there was no way to solve it. It was a bad start. I only severely injured one of them. I really can't see clearly below. My consciousness is limited, and I can't find them all. Princess Mingzhu said helplessly. Xiaoyang only nodded when he heard this. He began to plan again in his heart. What they were facing now was like a deadlock. It was difficult to see any hope, but he had to worry more and find a way out. Princess Mingzhu raised her eyes and looked at the three Yin Qi. She could not help but frown. Previously, she had seen some records about the Yin Qi in the ancient books. Although it was similar, she knew that this kind of technique was more difficult to deal with. Moreover, Princess Mingzhu knew that the techniques that the three of them cultivated were not effective against the Yin Qi. It seems that we were too careless. Princess Mingzhu said with some self-mockery. This was because they had almost no hope of turning the tables. The Yin Qi was still growing. When they had absorbed enough power, it would be difficult for the three of them to deal with them. By then, the other party would have more tricks up their sleeves, and they would not be able to deal with them. What carelessness! It's just that the other party is sinister. Bai Jian comforted himself. Previously, when he slashed with his sword, it was useless to cut the Yin Qi in half. This made him feel even more helpless. It was difficult for them to hurt the Yin Qi, but the other party could hurt them. Sinister? From your tone, it seems that you are not going to continue struggling? Mo Wu suddenly laughed. This laugh made the three Yin Qi laugh at the same time. However, no matter how one looked at the Yin Qi's laughter, it was ferocious and made one shudder. Chapter 2754. Then what else can we do? Why don't you teach us how to deal with you? Bai Jian asked with a smile. Hearing this question, Mo Wu smiled and shook his head. Are you asking the wrong person? Bai Jian shrugged when he heard this. He felt that there was nothing wrong with his question. However, he still felt a little unconvinced that he was going to die just like that. Therefore, Bai Jian gently stroked the blade of his sword with a thoughtful look. Although it looked like there was no way to deal with these Yin Qi, it was not Bai Jian's style to give up. Even if there was no way, He had to think of a way. The yin qi is indeed difficult to deal with, but it's not like there's no way to deal with it. Princess Mingzhu smiled. As soon as she finished speaking, she took out a very small flying sword. The flying sword was red like a raging fire. Xiao Yang glanced at it and gave her a thumbs up. Princess Mingzhu was indeed the apple of the God Realm's eye. She was so rich that she could rival a country. The treasures on her were endless. Mo Wu had to be cautious. He stared at Princess Mingzhu and clenched his fist. It could be said that the yin qi was one of his trump cards. If it was broken, he would have to come up with a new method. By then, the price he would have to pay would be even greater. If that was the case, it would not be good. Xiao Yang took a look and took out a bottle of pills. He gave it to the two and said, "Swallow it and stay true to your heart." Princess Mingzhu and Bai Jian did not hesitate and swallowed the pills. Then, black light flashed in Xiao Yang's hand, and a black lotus appeared in his hand. After Princess Mingzhu swallowed the pills, she knew what Xiao Yang was going to do. Back then, when Xiao Yang used the MOE Jade Lotus, it was this pill that allowed Princess Mingzhu to maintain her rationality and not be affected. How long will it take? Princess Mingzhu asked softly. When she saw the MOE Jade Lotus, she understood the crux of the matter. At the end of the day, these people were still the same person. No matter how powerful the 7 turns of the Furious River Formation was, it needed someone to control it. If these people were all gone, then no one would be able to control the formation. Xiao Yang bellowed and activated the poison. Immediately, the MOE Jade Lotus rose slowly, shining with a unique radiance that made people yearn for it. Even Bai Jian subconsciously wanted to get closer to him. Fortunately, Princess Mingzhu pulled him back and shook her head at him. Mo Wu saw that the expressions of the 3 people were so serious. He had never seen the Black Lotus before and did not know what use it had. He felt that if he continued to delay, it would only lead to more trouble. Since the other party was able to take out the lotus flower, it meant that he was confident. As such, how could he be careless? Immediately, yin qi pounced towards the lotus that was rising into the air. At the same time, countless yin flames also rushed out crazily, as if they wanted to devour him. Break! Princess Mingzhu let out a low shout, and the scarlet flying sword in her hand flew out, directly stabbing into a yin qi wherever the scarlet flying sword passed. The yin flames were like filthy things hiding in the darkness, quickly evading as if they felt the scorching sun in the sky. At the same time, the yin qi also felt fear and did not dare to resist at all, quickly dodging to the side. However, compared to the scarlet flying sword, its speed was still half a beat slower. When the scarlet flying sword stabbed into the yin qi, it immediately exploded, blasting the yin qi into pieces. Immediately, even Mo Wu, who was in his original body, was shocked. He staggered back, and in the blink of an eye his face turned pale. The soul that possessed the yin qi was directly blown into ashes by the scarlet flying sword. How could he, who was in his original body, be spared? After Mo Wu steadied himself, he held his forehead with one hand, and there was a look of pain on his face. Obviously, his original body had suffered a great impact and injury. In the next moment, Mo Wu looked at Princess Mingzhu with a look of resentment. This woman had directly blown up his soul. How abominable! How hateful! Bai Jian clicked his tongue in wonder when he saw this. He said, "And here I was wondering how powerful this yin qi would be. Just this flying sword is enough to break it. It's only eso." As he said, the corners of Bai Jian's mouth curled into a smile. He originally thought that he could not deal with the yin qi and would inevitably die here with hatred. Who would have thought that Princess Mingzhu's attack would be able to directly extinguish it? It was truly a false alarm. As long as these yin qi could be dealt with, then many things would not be a problem. Bai Jian raised his sword again. As long as Princess Mingzhu could destroy all these yin qi, then he still had the confidence to kill Mo Wu. If these yin qi were all gone, then, as the original body, Mo Wu would inevitably be greatly injured, and naturally it would be difficult to dodge his sword. After Mo Wu suffered this loss, he did not dare to act rashly. His eyes were fixed on Princess Mingzhu, and his resentment was indescribable. Princess Mingzhu did not speak, but looked sideways at Xiaoyang. As long as they absorb the power of the raging river, they will fall into the trap. Xiaoyang informed Princess Mingzhu through a secret technique. Princess Mingzhu smiled and nodded when she heard this. She knew what to do now. It seems that your yin qi can't cause any trouble to me. If you have any moves, then quickly use them. Otherwise, there will be no time later. Princess Mingzhu sneered. The situation had taken a turn for the worse, and this made Mo Wu feel even more miserable. He could not understand how things had developed to this point, and he was caught off guard. Looking at the lotus that was constantly emitting black light in the air, Mo Wu subconsciously clenched his fists. He did not know what was strange about it. In a situation where they did not know each other, Mo Wu really could not make up his mind. Mo Wu did have other moves, and there were as many as 7 of the moves brought by the 7 rotations of the raging river formation, and the yin qi was the 5th. As the moves were pushed further, the power would be greater, and the backlash would be more terrifying. Injecting one's soul into the yin qi was a great deal of damage to the body. If one wanted to obtain great power, how could there not be a price to pay? However, no matter how great the price was, it would be unbearable. Mo Wu still thought that he could take over the power from the family head, and then strive for the yin flame world. If he increased the power, he was afraid that he would not have a future to speak of. If you have no more moves, then it's my turn. Princess Mingzhu said in a deep voice. Golden Light Massacre. Chapter 27:55. A ray of golden sword qi fell with an overbearing aura. This strand of sword qi looked extremely magnificent. It was as if so long as this sword descended, it would be able to destroy mountains and topple mountains. Suddenly, Mo Wu breathed a sigh of relief. The 2 yin qi rushed toward the golden sword qi as if they were invincible. The 2 yin qi grabbed the golden sword qi and broke it. It was obvious how terrifying their strength was. It was shocking. Although the yin qi was also injured by the sword qi, the yin flames attached to it and quickly repaired it. It looked as if it had never been injured. Seeing this scene, Bai Jian could not help but gasp subconsciously. Although their strength could cause damage to the yin qi, the yin flames could repair it in a very short time. As long as the yin qi was not completely wiped out in an instant, as long as it was given a chance, it would recover immediately. It seemed that the yin qi was really difficult to deal with and not easy to deal with. Moreover, the yin qi was still absorbing the yin flames and was now comparable to a rank 5 expert. If it continued to grow, it was unknown how much the yin qi would grow. Sometimes, the power of creation of heaven and earth was so magical that it could give a person infinite power. As long as the formation was not broken, the yin qi would continue to exist. The remarkable power of the 7 rotations of the Furious River formation was so unreasonable. However, this kind of formation also had extremely high restrictions and costs. This kind of formation could only be used above the Furious River. Moreover, the more advanced the remarkable power, the more irreversible the damage and aftereffects it would cause to the person controlling the formation. Mo Wu looked at the woman in white with a smile in his eyes. In his opinion, she was at her wit's end. It seems that you don't have the small red sword anymore. Mo Wu sneered. The small red sword was indeed terrifying. It just so happened to restrain his yin qi and could destroy it directly. If Princess Mingzhu still had this item in her hands, then his yin qi would be completely destroyed. In fact, his vitality would be greatly damaged due to the destruction of his soul. Now that he had lost a part of his soul, Mo Wu's foundation was unstable. If it were not for the magical effect of the formation that allowed him to temporarily stabilize himself, he would have been defeated. Mo Wu was extremely helpless. He could compete with them by relying on the 7 rotations of the Furious River formation. However, in the end, it was a disaster. Originally, Mo Wu thought that as long as he controlled the formation, he could kill the 3 people here. However, who would have thought that the chips he had to pay were still increasing? Without the small red sword, he would not be restrained, and Mo Wu felt that the power would return to his hands again. Moreover, he did not have to use more advanced techniques to avoid paying a greater price. If there was no hope, Mo Wu could only come up with a more vicious method. Even if he would end up in a state worse than death, he would still be alive, and he would be able to find a way to break the curse. Princess Mingzhu shook her head helplessly and said, "It's just a coincidence, so you don't have to worry." Hearing this, Mo Wu was a little confused. The words of the woman in white were even stiffer. There were too many inexplicable and unexplainable feelings. Therefore, he also felt that there was something fishy about it. Even so, there was no need to worry too much. He just needed to be cautious. The 2 Yin puppets continued to absorb the power of the formation, increasing their own strength. Their momentum was constantly rising and strengthening. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, was fully focused on controlling the Mo-E Jade Lotus. The black light continued to sprinkle down. There were also many Yin flames attached to the black lotus. It was slowly burning. Mo Wu also knew that Xiao Yang was a meticulous person. He would not do anything meaningless. However, he did not know the magical effect of the black lotus. He could only use the Yin flames to test it out. Suddenly, Mo Wu felt that the black brilliance was very pleasing to the eye. It made him feel very comfortable. Bai Jian was also a little shaken. However, when Princess Mingzhu glared at him, he felt a chill down his spine. He immediately became much more clear-headed. "Since we have no more tricks up our sleeves, why don't you kill us?" Princess Mingzhu suddenly sneered and mocked. Mo Wu had always been more astute. Now that he heard Princess Mingzhu's mocking words, he felt that she must be up to something. That was why she said that. For them to be able to come here and turn the entire Wanshou realm upside down, how could they be unprepared? Using words to set a trap for me? That's too naive. Mo Wu sneered and said. Princess Mingzhu smiled, but did not say anything. She just held her sword and looked like she was ready to attack again. As long as Mo Wu could absorb the Yin flames to its heart's content, she would only need to attack. Bai Jian, on the other hand, was confused. He could not tell what Xiao Yang was up to. However, seeing that the 2 of them cooperated so well, he felt much more at ease. He was not as worried as before. At the same time, Bai Jian also remembered some rumors he heard when he first entered Fairy's capital. Now, it seemed that it was not without reason. However, Bai Jian could only suppress these thoughts in his heart. He did not dare to say them out loud. The 3 of them could be said to be invincible in the same realm. However, if they were to fight, they would only have their own advantages and disadvantages. In the end, they would be evenly matched. However, if the 2 of them joined forces, Bai Jian did not think that he could handle it. Princess Mingzhu did not know what Bai Jian was thinking. She slashed out with her sword again, still with all her strength. However, this sword seemed a little weak and had some flaws. In the raging river, Princess Mingzhu's robe was destroyed. How could she leave safely? She was already severely injured. However, because of the situation, she could only continue to hold on. Now, if any of the 3 of them were to give in, it would be the breakthrough point for the other party. Mo Wu urged the Yin Qi to resist. At the same time, he was also thinking in his heart. It would not be too late to kill them when the Yin Qi was comparable to a rank 6 powerhouse. Otherwise, the joint attack of the 3 of them might really be able to kill another Yin Qi with the force of a thunderbolt. Sometimes, it would be better to pay a lower price. There is no need to be too radical and pay the unnecessary price because of anxiousness. it would make one's sacrifice in vain. That was not what Mo Wu wanted to see. He presided over the formation to make a name for himself, not to sacrifice himself. Chapter 27:56. As time passed, the Tuyin Qi grew stronger and stronger. Under the combined attack of the Yin Qi, the Golden Sword Qi was torn to shreds in an instant. It was unable to harm Mo Wu at all. Feeling the Sword Qi's power weakening, Mo Wu's mood improved. No matter how talented or monstrous you are, there is still a time when a person's power is limited. However, he was different. He could borrow the power of the raging river. As long as the raging river did not dry up, Mo Wu's power would be endless as long as he stood there. Although he could not use the power of the formation to directly suppress the three of them and kill them quickly, he could slowly wear them down and torture them to death. That seemed like a very good choice. Now, you're just an arrow at the end of its flight. The elixirs you took before did not seem to be able to help you recover your spiritual power quickly. Mo Wu smiled, looking much more relaxed. Judging from the information he received, Mo Wu felt that victory was already in his grasp and there would be no more waves. Not to mention that outsiders like them did not understand the 7 turns of the raging river formation. Even Mo Wu only knew a little about it after he had truly gained control of it. Knowing nothing about the 7 turns of the raging river formation had doomed them. In Mo Wu's opinion, the only one who could pose a threat to him was Xiaoyang alone. Because his physical skills were also very high, if he really rushed over without any regard for his life and fought with the intention of exchanging a life for a life, Mo Wu would indeed suffer. However, it seemed that the other party did not realize this. The Yin flames could continuously erode spiritual power, so their power would only become weaker and weaker as a result. In the end, it was very likely that they would die from exhaustion. Princess Mingzhu was silent, still accumulating power and preparing for the next attack. Bai Jian was also a little confused, but he also prepared to attack again. Although he did not know anything now, he only needed to follow their lead. Even if there was no chance, they had to try. When it was time to use some of their trump cards, they naturally could not be stingy. In the next moment, countless sword auras appeared around Bai Jian's body. It was faintly discernible, as if it was about to solidify. Although there were many oddities in this 7 turns of the Furious River formation, Bai Jian was not without a solution. Looks like you guys are desperate. It's time for this farce to end. Mo Wu sneered. At this moment, the ability and aura of the Tuyin Qi were already comparable to a stage 6 powerhouse. The strength of the Yin Qi was the source of Mo Wu's confidence. However, it's time for this farce to end. Xiao Yang's expression suddenly relaxed as he said with a smile. Hearing this, Mo Wu couldn't help but be stunned. What was this fellow doing just now? Looking at the black lotus again, it didn't seem to be anything special. If that was the case, then where did his confidence come from? You're just playing tricks. If you really had any tricks up your sleeve, you would have used them long ago. Mo Wu shouted angrily. Although Mo Wu knew that these 3 people were not simple, it was only because they were blessed by the heavens when it came to cultivation. When it came to these unorthodox methods, their skills were far inferior. Mo Wu was not a coward. How could he not tell the difference between the 2 of them? He was just an arrow at the end of its flight. How could he still have the confidence to talk nonsense in front of him? Xiao Yang shrugged with a smile and said, "Since you don't believe me, there's nothing I can do about it." The Moe Jade Lotus was still suspended in midair. The black brilliance continued to sprinkle down, but in the next moment, it was covered by the Yin flames and burned to a crisp. Although the waves below were still turbulent, the situation seemed to have always been the same. Suddenly, the Tuyin Qi became somewhat uncontrollable. After sensing the abnormality of the Yin Qi, Mo Wu's eyes were filled with shock and disbelief. What was going on here? In the next moment, the Tuyin Qi began to collide as if they were mortal enemies, constantly attacking each other. What's more, They even drove the Yin flames to attack each other. Mo Wu was also dumbfounded. He did not understand what was going on. At the same time, he was also finding it difficult to control his own soul. It was as if those souls had their own thoughts. Or rather, they were now completely turned into puppets. Mo Wu was horrified. He couldn't understand what was going on with this sudden turn of events. At the same time, Bai Jian also looked at the scene in shock. He also found it hard to believe. The two Yin Qi were created by Mo Wu using his own soul. Now, they were attacking each other uncontrollably. This was a little inconceivable. They couldn't even figure out what was going on. What's going on? Bai Jian asked in a low voice. Princess Mingzhu frowned slightly and said, "If you don't want to attack us, guard your mind. Don't be affected." Bai Jian was confused and didn't know what was going on. Because Bai Jian had never experienced it, he didn't know the power of the Moe Jade Lotus. It could silently affect a person's mind and confuse them without them knowing. The Yin flames could devour spiritual energy. Naturally, the medicinal power of the Moe Jade Lotus could also be absorbed without anyone noticing. In the formation, they naturally couldn't avoid absorbing the Yin flames. It could be said that it was relatively easy to use such a method to deal with them. "What did you do?" Mo Wu asked angrily. Seeing his Yin Qi attacking each other, Mo Wu began to lose his composure. He felt that it shouldn't be like this. In the next moment, Mo Wu also came to a realization. His eyes also fell on the black lotus. The lotus was probably the cause of the current situation. Mo Wu, who was furious, looked at the lotus. Suddenly, his anger became extremely eerie. "It's just as you see." Xiaoyang smiled and shrugged. These words could be described as nonchalant, as if all of this had nothing to do with him. When the medicinal power of the Moe Jade Lotus was completely released, their minds were already confused and they couldn't extricate themselves. Therefore, they only needed to wait for these people to take the initiative to throw themselves into the lotus as nourishment. Be careful. Don't be accidentally hurt by these beasts who have lost control. Xiaoyang said in a low voice. Princess Mingzhu couldn't help but shiver as she looked at the tender lotus flower. Such a treasure had endless effects and was impossible to guard against. Chapter 27:57. All of a sudden, the raging river became turbulent, occasionally rippling with stormy waves. Mo Wu naturally sensed this great change clearly. He did not know why, but his fellow clansmen hiding in the river began to attack each other as if they were enemies. The techniques they used were even more ferocious. There were even father and son killing each other. They were like mortal enemies who could not wait to tear each other to pieces. At this moment, Mo Wu was indeed a little flustered. He still did not understand the sudden changes. Although he knew that it was because of the lotus, he could not tell what was going on. Because of the internal strife, the 7 rotations of the raging river formation had begun to shake due to the lack of control. It seemed that it could collapse at any time. After sensing these subtle changes, Bai Jian finally breathed a sigh of relief. As long as the formation was broken, he would no longer be restricted. Naturally, he would not have to continue to worry. Under normal circumstances, he was still that high-spirited, jade-faced, white-sword man. In such a strange place, he was restricted everywhere. The grievance in his heart was self-evident. Princess Mingzhu looked on coldly. At the same time, she was also wary of Bai Jian beside her. This was because he did not know the power of the Moe Jade Lotus. If he lost his mind and went crazy, it would not be good news. Although they had already taken the elixir given by Xiaoyang, they were not completely immune. Only after experiencing the pain would they know how terrible it was. "Xiaoyang, I'm going to kill you." Mo Wu roared angrily. The culprit of all this was the person who had brought out the black lotus. It was all his fault. As long as he was killed, these people would return to normal. The Yin flames could not quickly engulf the black lotus and refine it. Therefore, Mo Wu could only use the simplest method, which was to directly kill the person who controlled it, using the lotus to confuse people and make them kill each other. This method was indeed brilliant and very insidious. Mo was also glad that his mind was relatively strong and was not affected. Otherwise, if he, the person in charge of the formation, started to attack his own people, that would be the most terrifying thing. In the next moment, Mo stretched out a hand as if he was going to crush Xiaoyang to death. However, Xiaoyang's penguin was indifferent. It stood there, carefully guarding its surroundings and carefully observing the changes in the situation. At the same time, he also had some doubts in his heart. The array was already in a complete mess, which meant that the array was about to collapse. But now it was only on the verge of collapse and did not directly shatter. This made people wonder if there was some sort of problem. But then again, this 7 turns of the Furious River formation indeed could not be judged using common sense. If it was just an ordinary array, how could it cause Xiaoyang to be in such a bad shape and even be unable to do anything about it? As long as one looked carefully, they would be able to find some clues. Suddenly, a miserable shriek sounded out. One of the Mo family's people was grabbed by a huge flame palm. Moreover, it was constantly exerting force, as if it was going to crush him to death. Mo was still exerting force. He was also mobilizing the power of the array. What he wanted to do was to attack with all his strength and kill the person he wanted to kill. However, Mo did not know that the person in his palm was not Xiaoyang, but one of his own clan. The corner of Bai Jian's mouth twitched, and his eyes were filled with shock. At the same time, Bai Jian looked at Xiaoyang with some horror. This method was indeed strange, even stranger than the flame. It was impossible to guard against and could not be seen through. It could be said that it was done silently, and the other party did not even know what was going on. Looking at all these changes, he shuddered. Xiaoyang, on the other hand, stood there calmly with a faint smile on his face. It was as if he was enjoying the show. Mo had always thought that his mind was strong and was not affected at all. However, he did not know that he had been subconsciously affected. He just did not know it. At this moment, he was still in control, and he seemed to be enjoying it very much, because he thought that the person he killed was Xiaoyang. Princess Mingzhu was not affected at all, because she had seen such scenes before. She did not find it strange. Why didn't you take it out earlier? Princess Mingzhu complained. If he had taken out the Moe Jade Lotus earlier, they would not have been injured to this extent. They would not have been in a stalemate for so long and even lost hope several times. I didn't think of it at first. Xiaoyang scratched his head helplessly. In order to break this array, he had indeed put in a lot of effort. If it were not for Ling Xiu's change in the end, he would not have known that this method would work. Since Mo could borrow the power of the array to make a person lose their mind and become a war machine, he could also use the same method to counterattack. Princess Mingzhu sighed helplessly. However, there was an extremely great risk in using such a method. Unless there was no other choice, it was indeed impossible to use it. Such a trump card was indeed terrifying. Emojio, who was standing outside the raging river, looked at the scene in the array and was so angry that his hair stood on end. He did not understand what had happened, but Mo had attacked his companions. This was unforgivable. You bastard! How dare you use the power of the raging river to eliminate dissidents? Emojio said angrily. Emojio felt that Mo's future cultivation path would be bumpy because he had lost his soul. It would be difficult for him to convince others in the future. That was why he was so vicious and killed all these people who were more powerful than him. He had not even cleared the external enemies yet, and he had already done such a thing. He was too confident. Suddenly, Emojio's mind froze, because he saw that the two Inchi were attacking each other more and more ruthlessly. They did not show any mercy. Every time he was injured, Mo's expression would become more painful. However, as if he did not know anything, he still allowed the yin qi to attack each other without any intention of stopping them. This was enough to make people feel strange. Could it be that there is something wrong with the Black Lotus? Emojio thought and could not help but gasp. If that was the case, everyone's mind had been confused. That was why they attacked each other mercilessly. It was a mess inside the 7 turns of Raging River Ray. Emojio was trembling with anger. They had lost many experts in the battle of Flying Cloud Mountain. But now, were the remaining elites going to die in the hands of each other? Alas! Chapter 2758. Looking at his own people killing each other, Emojio was also very anxious. He felt that he could no longer watch this situation continue. Otherwise, it would not be long before he would truly become a loner. Even if Xiaoyang and the other 2 died in the Enraged River Formation, those elites would be completely gone. At that time, he, Emojio, would not be able to save the situation alone. Therefore, he had to stop this situation from continuing. He had to break it. Emojio did not think any further and directly charged towards the Enraged River. In the past, he had also controlled this formation. Naturally, he knew how it worked. Furthermore, he was confident that as long as he entered, he would be able to take control. At that time, he would shatter the Black Lotus, and they would no longer be controlled. However, just as Emojio reached the shore, a flame suddenly rose up. It was like a wall of fire and stopped him, causing him to be unable to move forward. Seeing that the yin flames had already become hot and fierce, Emojio also forcefully stopped his footsteps. If he continued to move forward, these flames would cause him harm. He had always relied on the Enraged River to cultivate. How could he not feel the emotions in these yin flames? This method was to prevent him from interfering. Why? Emojio frowned and asked in confusion. At that moment, Emojio felt that only he could stop this from happening. If he continued to watch from the sidelines, everything would be over. Seeing his own family members losing their lives due to internal strife, Emojio's heart was filled with even more discomfort. He clenched his fists tightly. Blood dripped from the gaps between his fingers. Emojio had also fallen into a violent rage. Originally, he felt that his method of dealing with this situation was very appropriate. He could bury the 3 people in the Enraged River. However, he did not expect that his people would be continuously sacrificed in the Enraged River. Emojio also did not understand why the Enraged River would stop him and prevent him from saving them. As such, to Emojio, it was a complete psychological torture. In the past, Emojio could be said to be able to do whatever he wanted in the yin flames. How glorious was that! It was as if there was nothing he could not do. But now, he could only watch as his men killed one another. Within the formation, Xiaoyang saw that although the surroundings had begun to loosen and showed signs of collapsing, it was still bitterly holding on and struggling at the edge. Looking at Emowu and the others, they had also completely lost their minds. Their control over the formation was probably very weak now. But why didn't it directly collapse? What kind of tricks and possibilities were involved in this? Xiaoyang shook his head. He didn't understand either, but he felt that things weren't as simple as he imagined. Therefore, he expanded his spiritual energy again in an attempt to find out what was going on. However, the yin flames restricted him greatly, making it difficult for him to find any clues. At this moment, the 2 yin qi were already exhausted from fighting. Moreover, both of them fell into the Mo Jade Lotus and turned into countless yin flames scattered on top. The brilliance of the Mo Jade Lotus was not suppressed by the yin flames. Instead, it became even more brilliant. The black brilliance was intoxicating and fascinating. At the same time, cultivators continued to appear from the river. They all moved closer to the Black Lotus. Looking at such a strange scene, Bai Jian could not help but subconsciously suck in a breath of cold air. Such a method, no matter where it was filled with strangeness. No one could see through it. At the same time, Bai Jian found it hard to imagine how terrifying it would be if Xiaoyang was his enemy. Just thinking about it was enough to send chills down one's spine. Fortunately, they weren't. As expected, to deal with these strange methods, we need to use the same insidious method to suppress them. Bai Jian smiled bitterly. He had never imagined that this incomparably powerful array formation would be so helpless at this moment. It was even difficult to use its power. Princess Ming Zhu glanced over and said, "You better take it easy. If you're affected by the MOE Jade Lotus, I'm afraid we won't be able to control you." Hearing that, Bai Jian waved his hand in fear, because until now he was still in a state of ignorance. However, Princess Ming Zhu had repeatedly warned him. Naturally, he could imagine that the effect of the MOE Jade Lotus would not differentiate between the enemy and his camp. The reason why he could still remain conscious now was probably because of the elixir he had taken. Xiao Yang frowned. Previously, he thought that the formation would naturally be broken after he took out the MOE Jade Lotus. However, he didn't expect that the formation would show no signs of being broken, even though it was on the verge of collapse. Could it be that someone is secretly manipulating it, and this MOE is just a pawn that is sacrificed on the surface? Xiao Yang frowned as he thought about it. After having such a thought, Xiao Yang was even more horrified. If that was the case, the consequences would be really terrifying. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. Moreover, they had been resisting the attack of the Yin flames. It was impossible for them to be in a state of high alert all the time. Therefore, they had also fallen into the trap. It was just that they were holding on with one breath. If there was an even more powerful character secretly manipulating them, the consequences would be unimaginable. Suddenly, Xiao Yang also thought of the strongest person in the Mo family. Perhaps he wasn't in the Furious River at all, but was watching and manipulating everything from outside. After having this thought, Xiao Yang couldn't help but take in a breath of cold air. If that was the case, then he wouldn't be affected by the MOE Jade Lotus. It could even allow everything to proceed in an orderly manner. If the other party was more conservative and didn't fall into the trap, it was enough to use this formation to trap them to death. Thinking of this, Xiao Yang couldn't help but feel a little scared. With the style of these cultivators in the Yin Flame world, what wouldn't they do? They were sinister and vicious. Mo Wu could even kill others and turn them into a monster to deal with them. With such a crazy style, no matter what they would do it. Xiao Yang didn't completely worry about this point. He was also thinking of other possibilities. He didn't know much about the new river, so most of the ideas he had were just impossible to come up with. Suddenly, a strange change happened again. A Yin flame directly swallowed the rampaging Mo Wu. Chapter 27:59. The Yin flames came from all directions and engulfed Mo Wu in the blink of an eye, burning and devouring him. Princess Ming Zhu and Bai Jian looked at each other, not knowing what was going on. The Yin flames were starting to devour the person controlling them. What was going on? Mo Wu was still slaughtering his fellow clansmen under the devouring of the Yin flames. However, his strength became weaker and weaker as a result. Obviously, he was seriously injured and could not continue. Xiao Yang, can you use Mo Wu as a stepping stone to control this formation? Bai Jian asked in disbelief. Xiao Yang shook his head. The MOE Jade Lotus can only confuse people. It's impossible to control it. Bai Jian was completely dumbfounded when he heard this explanation. So what was going on now? It was hard to understand. It seems that these guys in the Yin Flame world have a lot of tricks up their sleeves. Princess Ming Zhu said coldly. No one could imagine to what extent the Mo family had schemed this matter. Moreover, the current situation was really full of doubts, and they could not figure out what was going on. This place is full of evil energy. No wonder the cultivators here are different. They are all weird. Bai Jian said with some disdain. However, they were still at their wits' end and had no way to leave this place. So, they could only continue to observe. Suddenly, Xiao Yang thought of another possibility. He did not know if it was true, so he could only continue to observe. At the same time, Emowu was not the only one who was devoured by the flames. The other cultivators were not spared either. The flames attached to their bodies and continued to devour them. Emojio, who was standing outside, almost collapsed to the ground in despair. He felt as if a knife was stabbing his heart as he watched his good men lose their lives under the flames. Why is this happening? Emojio kept questioning, but no one could give him an answer. Emojio no longer had the same pressure as before. He now looked more like an old man in his twilight years. In an instant, his heart sank to the bottom of the valley. It was as if the prosperity of the past tens of thousands of years was all for naught. Those were all his elites, but in the end, they all became nourishment for the raging river. At the same time, they were unable to struggle at all. Even though Emojio knew very well that those elites would inevitably kill each other because their minds had been bewitched. However, there was still a chance for him to wake up. But now, the flames of the raging river had directly devoured them, so there was no reason for them to survive. "Let me in!" Emojio roared furiously. However, the river was still surging violently. In fact, it was even more violent than before. However, no one responded to him. That wall of fire was still standing there. Like a natural moat, it blocked Emojio's path. At this moment, Emojio was in complete despair. He had never imagined that things would end up like this. Looking at the rising flames that were still burning, his heart was filled with grief. Now he could not do anything. He could only watch everything unfold with his eyes wide open, but he could not stop it. In the formation, because Emowu and the others were devoured by the flames, they could no longer continue to attack. Therefore, Xiaoyang and the others only needed to guard against the invasion of the flames. These people have been burned to ashes by the flames. Why is the formation still not deactivated? Bai Jian was puzzled. Previously, the formation had already appeared to be on the verge of collapse. However, until now it had not collapsed. This made people unable to see through it. Princess Mingzhu had long noticed this and felt that it was full of problems. However, she could not tell what was going on. Although Xiaoyang could roughly guess what was going on, he wasn't sure if that was the case. Maybe the raging river is no longer just a simple river. It is a special river, Xiaoyang said helplessly. Princess Mingzhu and Bai Jian's eyes were filled with confusion when they heard this. Such a statement really made them somewhat confused. If the raging river was not a special river, then what was it? The raging river may have given birth to its own spiritual wisdom in this long time. Therefore, Emowu and the others were devoured by the flames just now because of the raging river. Xiaoyang took a deep breath and said, "Since the drifting cloud realm could give birth to a world spirit, the raging river had also existed for a long time. In addition, there were many cultivators cultivating here, and many powerful figures had fallen here. It was not impossible for it to give birth to spiritual wisdom under various coincidences." How is this possible? Bai Jian's mouth twitched as he muttered, "Why is it impossible?" Princess Mingzhu smiled. In this regard, Princess Mingzhu was very open-minded. The world was so big that there were all kinds of strange things. Moreover, the medium world was originally more spiritual qi than the small world. Therefore, under many possibilities, it was not strange for dead things to gain spiritual wisdom. In fact, even magic tools that reached a certain level could develop spiritual intelligence. What's more, the raging river was rumored to have been here since the flame realm appeared. So it was not surprising that it could give birth to spiritual wisdom. It could be said that this was the only explanation why the formation did not collapse. It was probably controlled by the raging river itself. As soon as they finished speaking, the flames in front of them kept gathering and quickly turned into a human figure. Looking at the human figure formed by the flames, Bai Jian's mouth twitched even more. Previously, he felt that this statement was more or less outrageous. But after seeing it with his own eyes, it didn't seem strange anymore. Bai Jian even shook his head hard, but he found that what he saw was indeed real. "There are really all kinds of strange things," Bai Jian said with some despair. Xiaoyang just smiled indifferently and waved his hand, putting the MOE Jade Lotus into his bag. This thing obviously could not affect the raging river spirit, and Mo Wu and the others had lost their lives. If it continued to be left there, it might only affect them in the end. "I was just guessing before, but I didn't expect it to really give birth to spiritual wisdom," Xiaoyang said with a smile. The human-shaped flame was still condensing, as if it was about to become a human figure. However, the raging river spirit's cultivation was still shallow, and its spiritual wisdom was not completely enlightened, so it could not condense a real body. Chapter 2760. After the spirit of the raging river appeared, the array that was about to collapse completely stabilized. Just the spirit of the raging river was enough to defeat many cultivators. After all, as a spirit, the entire raging river was under its control. Therefore, controlling it was naturally easy. It only needed a thought, and it could cooperate with great tacit understanding. It could be seen that the world spirit was now very angry. It showed great hostility towards these 3 uninvited guests, as if it couldn't wait to skin them alive and tear their bones apart. Bai Jian felt that it was interesting. It was his first time seeing such a spirit. When he saw those dead spirits in the tomb of the gods, he felt that they were very strange. But now that he saw a spirit, he was also very curious. At the same time, Bai Jian couldn't understand what kind of conditions this dead thing had to have to be able to develop intelligence. "I know that it wasn't easy for you to cultivate intelligence. If you sink now, we will be safe. But if we fight, there will be casualties." Xiaoyang frowned and said sternly. The hostility that the spirit of the raging river emitted was very obvious. Xiaoyang naturally sensed it. This kind of feeling made him very unhappy. At the same time, he thought highly of the raging river. If he could subdue it, it wouldn't be bad. If he boldly thought about it, he could place it in the flowing cloud world and let it become a natural pass. This would also reduce a lot of unnecessary trouble. If others wanted to invade the flowing cloud world, they would have to pass through the raging river first. The spirit of the raging river didn't reply, but looked at them angrily. Originally, the spirit of the raging river had been silent for a long time. It could be said that it was dreaming, but these cultivators woke it up, so it was furious. Moreover, the spirit of the raging river and the Mo family relied on each other. Now that the other side had encountered a great change, how could it stand by and do nothing? You are originally a dead thing. It wasn't easy for you to obtain intelligence by chance. The Tao is difficult. There's no need to explain it to yourself at this juncture. Or do you not believe that we have the ability to move mountains and fill oceans? What's more, you're just a river. Even if he has many extraordinary aspects, in my eyes, it's just SOSO, Xiaoyang continued. The spirit of the raging river still did not respond. Instead, it continued to condense its own figure. However, it looked very funny. This was because it wanted to condense a clear human figure, but no matter how hard it tried, it couldn't really condense. Just like the world spirit of the flowing cloud realm, he had refined a true human form. Bai Jian stood by the side, seemingly having nothing to do. At the same time, he was also very curious as to why Xiaoyang was so patient with this dead thing. This was rather unexpected. Princess Mingzhu, on the other hand, was already prepared. Even if a battle broke out, she could ensure her own safety and quickly counterattack. Right now, the spirit of the raging river seemed to be in a violent rage. It wouldn't be easy to make it stop, just like that. Xiaoyang couldn't help but feel a little angry as he looked at the raging river that was still condensing into a human form. The other party had obviously turned a deaf ear to his words. If you insist on doing this, you might as well give it a try even if you don't want your spiritual foundation. When the time comes, you only need to know that you asked for it, Xiaoyang said coldly. Even an old fox like Mo Wu couldn't do anything to him. The spirit of the raging river had yet to fully develop its spiritual wisdom, and you want to compete with him? Using the power of this river? It was indeed terrifying. However, if it wanted to pose a threat to Xiaoyang, it was more or less lacking. In the next moment, the spirit of the raging river responded. However, it didn't use words but actions. On the raging river, there were raging waves that rushed towards the three of them. The river water surged and rushed to the sky as if it was covering the sun. Such a vast momentum could be said to have completely suppressed the arrogance of Xiaoyang and the others. It was extremely terrifying. Looking at the flame-like river water surging towards them, Bai Jian was extremely shocked. He took the lead and sword light shone continuously, piercing towards the river water that was rushing towards them. However, after the sword qi pierced into the river water, it was like a stone sinking into the sea. There was no sign of life. On the contrary, the river water seemed to have absorbed the power of the sword qi. Its momentum became even more tyrannical, as if it was unstoppable. So strange? Bai Jian sucked in a breath of cold air and said in shock, "In this world, there was actually something that Bai Jian couldn't cut open. It was the river water, and it was also flames." With the example of Bai Jian, Princess Mingzhu also knew that it would be difficult to block such a strange attack with ordinary means. Therefore, she could only use some techniques. Immediately, Princess Mingzhu made a gesture with both hands. Immediately, her body emitted a yellow halo that looked peaceful and auspicious. Xiaoyang stared angrily at the spirit of the raging river that was in a rage. Xiaoyang was also very angry. He had given him a chance. Why didn't he cherish it properly? In the blink of an eye, the river water arrived. However, where the yellow halo reached, the river water seemed to be blocked and began to separate, unable to flow in. On Princess Yu Mingzhu's head, there was a jade pendant that was faintly discernible. After Princess Mingzhu obtained the mysterious yellow jade, she spent most of her time comprehending it and did not use it in battle. However, facing such a strange attack, she could only give it a try. She didn't expect the mysterious yellow jade to be a treasure that existed in the ancient records of the realm of the gods. She didn't expect its effect to be so heaven-defying that it could separate the in-flame river water. This made Bai Jian click his tongue in amazement. At the same time, his heart also suffered an even greater blow. As expected of Princess Mingzhu, the treasures on her could be said to be endless. The spirit of the raging river did not calm down because its attack was separated. Instead, it became even more furious. With a roar, countless river water soared into the sky and poured in from all directions. The river water was like a long dragon that soared endlessly. It carried a monstrous rage and was unstoppable. Its momentum was terrifying, and it shook one's soul. Now, the spirit of the raging river seemed to be somewhat hysterical. It was as if it wanted to use all the in-flame river water in the raging river to bury the three cultivators who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Then it would use its own ability to burn them into ashes. Looking at the monstrous waves, Princess Mingzhu's brows couldn't help but knit together. How could she look down on such a grand display of power? If she could borrow the power of heaven and earth, Princess Mingzhu would naturally not be afraid. However, she was unable to do so now. She could only rely on her own strength to fight. Chapter 2761. The river water was overwhelming. Even though the mysterious yellow jade had boundless divine power, under such a powerful impact, the yellow radiance became dim and turbulent, as if it could shatter at any time. Princess Mingzhu forced herself to maintain a posture. Her hands formed a seal, and her body trembled constantly. A trace of blood even flowed from the corner of her mouth. She was still holding on. If they were really involved in the river water, it would be difficult for the three of them to escape, even if they had many techniques. They might even be buried in the raging river. It was not easy to get rid of Mo Wu and the others, but now it was destroyed by the spiritual wisdom derived from the raging roar. It would be a joke. However, it was very difficult to compete with the power of heaven and earth with one's own strength. For now, Princess Mingzhu's support seemed very dangerous and was about to collapse. Xiao Yang shook his head and sighed helplessly when he saw that Princess Mingzhu was almost unable to hold on. It seemed that these inanimate objects that had just developed spiritual wisdom were still inanimate objects, after all. They did not understand what it meant to judge. Since the raging river spirit had already given its choice, Xiao Yang naturally did not need to be polite with it. Since you are so stubborn and still want to attack us, don't blame me for being ruthless. Xiao Yang said in a low voice. Bai Jian was thinking in his heart, whatever means you have, hurry up and take them out. If this continued, once Princess Mingzhu could not hold on, the three of them would have to die here. Xiao Yang's mind turned, and he took out the mountain river map. The seals in his hands were constantly changing. The mountain river map slowly rose and unfolded. At the same time, it bloomed with light. When the map came out of the mysterious yellow brilliance, it sucked in the river water that poured in. No matter how much water there was in the raging river, the grade of the mountain river map had improved a lot after a long time of sacrificial refining. Your raging river alone was enough to absorb half of the water, and there was still a surplus. Seeing the river water pouring into the mountain river map, Bai Jian secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Perhaps the current situation was not as bad as he had imagined. The spirit of the raging river's attacks were indeed very ferocious and gave them a headache. With Bai Jian's current ability, it was almost impossible for him to fight against it. Fortunately, Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu had many tricks up their sleeves, so he didn't have to worry too much. He only needed to watch the show. If it was a battle, Bai Jian was completely unafraid. However, in the face of such a ferocious attack, he was truly helpless. In fact, he could only resign himself to death. When the spirit of the raging river saw its power pouring into the strange picture, it immediately stopped and didn't dare to continue. The stately painting was so big that it was more than enough to contain the entire furious river. However, Xiao Yang dared not do that. If he put the entire raging river inside, and the raging river caused a ruckus, even the Caesar grotto heaven inside would be affected. The stately painting might even collapse and be destroyed because of this, due to the spirit of the raging river's previous ferocious attack, as well as the fact that a lot of the river water had been taken in. The water below became much shallower. The spirit of the raging river looked at Xiao Yang furiously. Its attack was still very limited after all, and its greatest reliance was to use the inflamed river water to devour the enemy. However, Xiao Yang had destroyed it completely. Now, it seemed to have lost all its reliance and couldn't fight against them at all. Xiao Yang looked at the raging river, which was still in a rage, and shook his head helplessly. It seemed like he had to teach this dead thing a lesson today. Otherwise, it wouldn't be easy to subdue it. These dead things that had yet to be fully enlightened would only know what it meant to submit after suffering a lot. Although the raging river seemed to have given up, Princess Mingzhu wasn't in a hurry to retrieve the mysterious yellow jade. After all, this was still the spirit of the raging river's territory, so they couldn't be careless. If it found an opportunity, they would be the ones at a disadvantage. "You bastard, you really don't know what's good for you." Xiao Yang shook his head and said furiously. Immediately, Xiao Yang's hand seals changed. Suddenly, the mountain river map rose up again, and it continued to expand and grow. The spirit of the raging river glared angrily, as if it couldn't wait to tear its opponent into pieces. However, it didn't have any more tricks up its sleeve. Although the spirit of the raging river could control the formation, it couldn't unleash its power. Although the spirit of the raging river had gained intelligence, it was still clueless. If such a dead thing had gained intelligence, it would definitely become something extraordinary. It might even be possible for it to seek the Great Way. It wasn't because of its great aptitude, but because it could make use of its eternal vitality to gradually grow. In the blink of an eye, the mountain river map flew high into the sky and shone brightly. Then a small mountain fell. At the same time that the small mountain was falling, it was also constantly expanding and expanding. Flying Cloud Mountain. Princess Mingzhu was shocked when she saw it. Using a mountain to shake water was indeed a good idea, and it was also feasible. Moreover, it was common knowledge. If it was used well, it could achieve an unexpected effect. Looking at the growing flying cloud mountain, the spirit of the raging river began to panic and prepared to escape. If it was really suppressed by the flying cloud mountain, it would be finished if it wanted to escape. However, it was too late for the spirit of the raging river to escape. The flying cloud mountain's aura had completely locked onto the spirit of the raging river, making it difficult for it to move. It could only stand there in a daze and didn't dare to resist at all. At that moment, the spirit of the raging river was in despair. It wanted to escape, but it couldn't move its feet. Xiao Yang's face was grim as he stared blankly at the spirit of the raging river. Previously, the dead thing could be said to be extremely arrogant. It even started a fight because of a disagreement. However, it was now as scared as a chick and didn't dare to move at all. At that moment, the spirit of the raging river was completely terrified. Its condensed human figure began to scatter and fall like water droplets. It wanted to use this method to escape. As long as a single water droplet could fall into the river and be quickly washed away, it would be able to avoid being suppressed. Although it was a last resort, it was still worth a try. However, just as the spirit of the raging river fell into the water, the flying cloud mountain also fell. It was too late to escape. Chapter 2762. After the soaring cloud mountain landed, the river water surged, and even the ground trembled because of it. Although the spirit of the raging river was cunning, it was completely suppressed by the mountain and could not escape at all. Under the suppression of the soaring cloud mountain, the huge raging river was directly split into two. Naturally, the spirit of the raging river would not give up just like that. It was still struggling and mobilizing the power of the raging river to attack the soaring cloud mountain, wanting to destroy it. However, the soaring cloud mountain was so big that it was more than enough to cut the raging river in half. The raging river's cultivation was not high, and the abilities it could use were limited. It was almost impossible for it to shake the soaring cloud mountain. The eruption of such a dead thing could not be underestimated, and the soaring cloud mountain began to shake. The moment the spirit of the raging river was suppressed, the formation could no longer be maintained and collapsed. Mo Jiu, who was standing on the riverbank, looked at the soaring cloud mountain that suddenly appeared, and his brows furrowed even more. Mo Jiu did not expect that the soaring cloud mountain that Xiao Yang had refined into a magic weapon would be put to use so quickly and successfully suppress the raging river. The raging river belonged to the soft type of power. In front of the heavy soaring cloud mountain, it was obviously not enough. No matter how it attacked, it could no longer shake it. Seeing the formation dissipate and the raging river below, Bai Jian secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Of course, to him, the happiest thing was that he was no longer restricted by the formation. This feeling was really comfortable. However, in the next moment, Bai Jian grimaced in pain. The damage caused by the Yin flame had completely exploded. The pain that came from every part of his body made him feel as if there was no part of his body that was intact. Xiao Yang did not look at the raging river. His gaze landed directly on Mo Jiu. Mo Jiu had always been the leader of the Mo family, and his strength was also the strongest. Only by completely killing Mo Jiu would the Mo family's strength be considered destroyed. Moreover, Mo Jiu was someone who must die. Back then, when the Yin Flame realm invaded the Four Realm Alliance, it was Mo Jiu who initiated the invasion. He even pulled the Fire Gathering Union along with him. If it wasn't for Mo Jiu's intentions, the current Four Realms Alliance would still be as prosperous as before. But now there was no sound for 1,000 miles. Many innocent people had lost their lives in that invasion. At this moment, Mo Jiu's heart involuntarily trembled. He clearly understood that since these three youths were able to continuously break through and even suppress Nuhi, it was obvious just how frightening their methods were. Just how terrifying was the strength of these three little fellows. Such a thought caused Mo Jiu to be extremely terrified. Wanting to compete with them, was merely courting death. Even their Mo clan's last pillar of support, the New River, had been suppressed. With his own strength, it was undoubtedly a fool's dream if he wanted to fight against the New River. However, Mo Jio's anger didn't allow him to escape immediately. In fact, he knew in his heart that where could he escape to? At this critical juncture, if anything were to happen, his reputation would plummet. Moreover, if he left, the Mo clan behind him would be completely exposed. At that time, the younger generation would also be slaughtered. At this moment, Mo Jio immediately used his mind to transmit a message to the younger generation in the Mo clan's courtyard. They were to quickly escape from the courtyard and seek refuge in various places. The opponents were so strong that Mo Jio didn't think he could win against them. So what if they were one realm higher? Any one of the three opponents had the ability to challenge those of a higher realm. Princess Mingzhu held onto the hilt of her sword. Although the pain had already flared up, the battle wasn't over yet. Therefore, there were some conditions that couldn't be displayed. Once they were discovered and captured, it wouldn't be good news for them. Thinking of this, Princess Mingzhu couldn't relax even a little. After all, this was their territory. There might be some experts hiding in the dark. Their previous battle results and divine might were enough to scare away many people. If they showed any signs of weakness, those guys would swarm up without hesitation and attack them. Ants could bite an elephant to death. This was a principle since ancient times. Furthermore, the current situation of the three of them was not very optimistic. If they were in their peak condition, they naturally wouldn't have to worry about this. However, the current situation was very bad. Mo Jio was also an old fox. After he thought of the worst situation, he started to think of the best situation. The three of them took turns to fight in the 7 turns of the Furious River Formation. It was impossible that they didn't consume any energy. Perhaps they were already at the point where their oil ran out. Moreover, he was waiting at ease for them to exhaust themselves. He even saw many of their trump cards. If the plan was executed properly, it would be possible to kill all three of them here. Moreover, this might be Mo Jio's only chance. Now, Xiaoyang and the other two were weakened because of the huge consumption. If he didn't take action now, when their injuries and strength recovered, there wouldn't be any more chances. In these tens of thousands of years, you guys are still the first batch to be able to break the 7 turns of the Furious River Formation. Mo Jio couldn't help sighing. Although they were currently standing on opposite sides, such a person was indeed admirable. The Furious River in the past was like the Great Wall, protecting them from everything. However, the Great Wall collapsed now. It could be said that when the 7 turns of the Furious River Formation collapsed, the faith in the hearts of many people in the Mo family also collapsed along with it. There are indeed many strange things in this Furious River. It's just a pity that they ran into me, Xiaoyang said with a smile. If not for Xiaoyang's rich combat experience and knowledge, many people would probably only die with hatred in this Furious River. Sometimes, wanting to break an array formation didn't require finding the array core. One could start from other places, and it would be much easier. It could be said that Xiaoyang didn't really break the 7 turns of the Furious River Formation either. He only used methods to make those people controlling the array formation lose their minds and kill each other, making it collapse naturally. However, the spirit of the raging river was something completely unexpected. Bai Jian gripped the hilt of his sword tightly with one hand. He was also clear that there would be a bitter battle next. No matter how terrible their current situation was, it was a matter of life and death. They had to fight on. Chapter 2763. If you choose to commit suicide now and kill all the cultivators involved in this matter, I can consider letting your Mo family go, Xiaoyang said coldly. Looking at this old man who had suddenly aged a lot, Xiaoyang did not have any mercy in his heart. To be merciful to the enemy was to be cruel to oneself. He had tasted this bitterness before. Of course, if Mo Jio was tactful and committed suicide, he could save a lot of effort. By doing so, The prestige he could gain would be different. Mo Jiu, the patriarch of the three major forces, was so frightened that he committed suicide. Once such news spread out, the entire Flame world would be terrified and no one would dare to stand out to stop them. Hearing this, Mo Jiu laughed out loud. He felt that this young man was really arrogant, even a little whimsical. If it was a different situation, Mo Jiu might really be frightened. But now, how could he do such a stupid thing? Previously, I told the spirit of the raging river to be honest, but it did not believe me, so now it is suppressed under the flying cloud mountain, Xiaoyang said coldly. As soon as these words came out, Mo Jiu also subconsciously glanced at the flying cloud mountain. Indeed, he had clearly seen the situation earlier. This Xiaoyang was really unfathomable, and looking at his current appearance, he did not seem to be joking, and he still had strength left. Once such thoughts started, Mo Jiu was also a little conflicted. But Mo Jiu calmed down very quickly. He felt that how could he give in like this? Until the end, who would know the result? There were some things that could only be known after trying them out. Do you really think this seat is retarded? Now, you are just an arrow at the end of its flight. You want to scare me with a few words? Mo Jiu said disdainfully. Bai Jian just shook his head helplessly when he heard this. Why did this guy not believe in heresy? Many people felt that Xiaoyang was just bluffing, but who knew that he was telling the truth? Most of the time, it was uncertain whether it was true or false, making people unable to see through it. This was the terrifying part. Based on the domineering attitude you displayed when you came to the Flame world, if you really had the ability to kill me, why would you waste words with me? Mo Jiu sneered. It was also because of this that Mo Jiu became even more determined. The other party didn't have much strength left, so he used such a method to scare him. If he really believed his opponent's words and decided to punish them, that would be the stupidest thing in the world. If he surrendered now, all his previous efforts would be for naught. He really isn't trying to scare you. Bai Jian shrugged his shoulders and advised. Mo Jiu, on the other hand, paid no attention to them. Since they were echoing each other, he naturally had to speak up for them. I was just scaring him, Xiaoyang added. One of them admitted to it, while the other denied it flatly. This was enough to make the other party feel uncomfortable for a long time. Princess Mingzhu, on the other hand, did not say a single word. She had also calculated clearly that with her current remaining strength and current state, wanting to kill Mo Jiu was indeed not an easy matter. Every time she made a move in the future, she had to make careful calculations. Otherwise, she would probably suffer a huge loss. Bai Jian glared at Xiaoyang. This agreement was completely putting hot face on a cold, but looking at these two fellows in different appearance, Mo Jiu was extremely furious. They really did not place him, a veteran rank 6 powerhouse, in their eyes. But this was good too. The more they pretended to be relaxed like this, the more certain he could be that they were just putting on an act. At the same time, Mo Jiu was also secretly accumulating power. Since the battle was unavoidable, it was best to end it quickly. If it dragged on and let these 3 little fellows catch their breath, then there would be endless trouble in the future. All of a sudden, Mo Jiu roared furiously and immediately blasted a punch out. Immediately, an extremely domineering fist intent struck out. Immediately, space seemed to be shattered from the shock. Rumbling sounds lingered on incessantly. On that fist there were flames attached, looking extremely strange. Mo Jiu did not have the patience to continue chatting with them. Perhaps the other party was just delaying time to recover. Therefore, he could not give them any chance to catch their breath. Seeing this punch coming, Princess Mingzhu did not retreat to defend herself. Instead, she counterattacked. The treasured sword in her hand was unsheathed. Immediately, a golden sword aura appeared out of thin air and directly slashed towards Mo Jiu. Looking at the golden sword aura that suddenly appeared in the sky, Missouri Jiu was also shocked in his heart. This woman was really rash. Under such circumstances, she still dared to take the initiative to attack? Feeling the domineering sword aura, Mo really did not dare to be careless. He immediately rushed into the sky, wanting to break that sword aura. Although Princess Mingzhu was not on guard, she was not alone. Xiaoyang rushed out and blasted a punch down. He was actually prepared to meet the fist aura head-on. Boom! Immediately, Xiaoyang was forced to retreat a few steps before he could stabilize his body. However, the fist aura was directly shattered by him. Countless fist auras directly hit Xiaoyang's body. Although he had the intent to protect his body, his current condition was really too bad. Therefore, he still suffered some injuries. Even his arm was trembling involuntarily. It was obvious how terrifying that punch was. However, at the end of the day, the three of them were still somewhat exhausted. They were in a situation where their spirit was willing, but their strength was insufficient. Within the 7 turns of the Furious River formation, their energy was almost completely depleted. Break! Mo roared angrily. Countless amounts of energy surged up and wrapped around the golden sword aura. It actually tore it apart. From that sword, Mo completely read the information within. The sword aura looked domineering, but it was already lacking in energy. Obviously, it was the result of the severe loss of energy. Therefore, what did he have to fear? Mo was very happy in his heart. Luckily, he did not choose to run away directly, or else he might have missed this great opportunity. Earlier, you were acting pretentious, and it seemed like you were doing it. However, after this attack, you've completely exposed yourself, Mo said with a cold smile. If they did not fight, they would never know their opponent's true strength. Therefore, no matter what the situation was, they would only know after they fought. Princess Mingzhu, on the other hand, looked unconvinced. She also prepared to attack again. She could not be blamed. Previously, in order to resist the backflow of the river, Princess Mingzhu had fought against the power of heaven and earth by herself. At that time, her energy had already been depleted. Although the sword aura that she slashed out was still spirited, it had lost its strength. Looks like you're lucky this time. However, even if you guessed correctly, you won't have to die, Xiaoyang said. Chapter 2764. Xiaoyang was still as confident as ever, as if the current situation was still under his control and there was no need to worry at all. That was why he could say such arrogant words. However, Mo laughed in disdain. To him, this was just a small trick that the other party had set up. It was not easy for the three of them to break the 7 rotations of the Furious River formation together. Moreover, he could see it clearly from outside the formation. In order to find a way to break the formation, the three of them had used countless methods and were severely injured in the formation. Even describing the three of them as arrows at the end of their flight was overestimating them. Now, they were only strong on the outside but weak on the inside. Although the lady could still slash out an extremely strong sword chi, that was all. It would have been fine if they did not attack. Once they attacked, many problems were exposed. In that case, what did Mo have to fear? No matter how strong you are or how talented you are, there will always be a limit to your strength. I have to say that you are indeed very ambitious and very confident. However, things have developed to such a stage that it is no longer within your control. As Mo spoke, he frowned. Suddenly, his spirit changed drastically. As the saying goes, a long night brings many dreams. If he continued to delay, the three of them would definitely seize the time to recover their spiritual power. Once they were done with their repairs, he was afraid that what he was waiting for would be his own period of time. Take his life while he is weak. In the next moment, Mo roared furiously. Suddenly, countless flames rose around his body. At the same time, he began to charge forward. The aura of a 6th-level martial emperor was fully displayed. Now he no longer had any scruples. There was only brutality and murderous rage. Since the Mo family had paid such a huge price, it was naturally time to clean up the mess. If they still could not kill the three of them at this point, then the Mo family's tens of thousands of years of foundation would not be enough. Moreover, Mo Ju knew that although joining forces with the other two supreme experts to deal with them was the best choice, there was no time now. Moreover, if everyone could really work together against a common enemy, the Mo family would not have been wiped out like a candle in the wind. Moreover, the importance of the Furious River to the Mo family was self-evident. Once the news of the Furious River being breached and suppressed by them spread, all the cultivators in the central region would be terrified. Who would dare to fight against them? Even the experts from the other forces would be caught in a dilemma. They might even start to flee out of fear. Who would have the guts to compete with them? Therefore, it was time for this battle to come to an end. It could not be dragged on any longer. Moreover, the more they delayed, the stronger the other party would be. Seeing Mo Ju suddenly charging over, not giving them the slightest chance to rest and recover, Xiaoyang only coldly snorted, and then charged over in an extremely unyielding manner. None of them were fools. How could they not see the clues in the current situation? Since an opportunity had appeared, he naturally had to grasp it firmly in his hands. Moreover, they had to kill him in one blow. Now, Xiaoyang and the others were indeed in a very bad situation. However, the other party had already shown his unforgiving spirit. It could be said that there was no way to avoid it. They could only fight with force. Only by killing Mo Jiu would the power of the Mo family be completely destroyed. Mo Jiu saw that the young man, who was originally covered in wounds, still insisted on charging forward. The smile on his face was a little more disdainful. If it was before, he would still be a little afraid. He would even choose to avoid the sharp edge and not dare to fight with him. However, their situation was different now. They were not even an arrow at the end of its flight. How could they fight against someone of a higher level? Could it be that they really did not put him, a genuine 6th-level martial emperor, in their eyes? Once someone had such thoughts, they would have to pay the price for it. The Yin flames burned more vigorously because of this, as if countless demons and ghosts were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. It looked somewhat sinister and terrifying. Seeing this, Princess Mingzhu did not hesitate at all. She immediately raised the sword in her hand and prepared to fight with him. The three of them were indeed in a very bad situation. This was true. However, it was not impossible for them to fight with him if they worked together. However, in the next moment, Princess Mingzhu felt a pain in her chest. Instantly, the little bit of aura that she had gathered with great difficulty collapsed in an instant. It was difficult to continue. Princess Mingzhu was a little depressed. She had never thought that she would be in a situation where her strength was not enough. Previously, when they were fighting in the raging river, Princess Mingzhu's robe was completely destroyed. In addition to the many unforeseen events, her injuries were very serious. The slash from before was already extremely forceful. It was also because of that slash that Mo Jiu realized that his chance had really come. The preparation from before was indeed for the victory now. All the sacrifices were worth it. There was no need to brood over it. Princess Mingzhu's face was filled with pain. She wanted to forcefully gather her strength now, but the pain in her body kept coming. It caused her breathing to become intermittent. Bai Jian, who was beside her, naturally noticed this. He stood with his sword and prepared to attack at the same time. Since Princess Mingzhu could no longer continue fighting, he had to step forward. Otherwise, if Xiaoyang were to face such a strong opponent alone, the final outcome would only point to disaster. However, compared to Princess Mingzhu's situation, how good could Bai Jian's situation be? When Xiaoyang was fighting with the monster, Bai Jian had fought against Mo Wu alone. At that time, he was indeed in high spirits and looked like he was suppressing his opponent. However, the injuries he had suffered were also not small. However, Bai Jian was also a very tenacious person. If he felt that he could fight, then he could fight. However, when the sword aura emerged, he suddenly lost control. He shuddered and fell to the ground. His injuries were too serious and even a little difficult to control. In addition, he had forcefully gathered his strength, causing it to become uncontrollable. He could only fall to the ground. Even Bai Jian's body was still emitting sword aura. It was emitted uncontrollably because his own sword aura had gone berserk. However, Bai Jian's eyes were fixed on Mo Jiu. It was as if he could not move, but he still wanted to use his sword to kill the enemy. His gaze was very sharp, like the edge of a sword. It was unstoppable. However, in the end, it was just a gaze. Chapter 27:65. In the blink of an eye, Xiaoyang and Mo Jiu had collided. Xiaoyang punched out. He relied on the strength of his physical body and was prepared to use this method to kill Mo Jiu directly. Sometimes the most direct fist technique could achieve unexpected results and even allow him to obtain victory more easily. After doing so many things previously, Xiaoyang did not have much spiritual energy left in his body. It could even be said that fighting with one's fists was something that one had no choice but to do. However, Xiaoyang had cultivated the 10,000 elephant true intent art properly. When he punched out, there were fist auras. Countless fist auras were uncontrollable and scattered in all directions. The killing power was even more terrifying. Countless cracks started to appear on the ground because of the fist auras. Mo Jiu still did not care. From his point of view, Mo Jiu's method was just a desperate struggle of a cornered beast. No matter how powerful he was, it was just the final radiance of the setting sun. As long as he could survive this period, it would not be a problem to kill them later. Although it would still take some effort, it didn't matter. As long as they could break their last breaths, they could rest easy after that. He had to forcefully disperse their anger and not let them come back to their senses. When they came into contact, some of the Yin flames were scattered by the fist auras. Mo Jiu could not help but feel a sense of fear when he saw this. This person's aura was indeed powerful. With such ability, who would dare to believe that he was only a 5th-level martial emperor? Perhaps, when he was at his peak, he was even stronger than the 6th-level martial emperors of the older generation. The younger generation would surpass them in time. Moreover, they came from the 3,000 small worlds. Xiaoyang punched out, and instantly the Yin flames in front of him turned into powder and fell down like dust. How could Xiaoyang not know the current situation? Because he knew it too well, he had no choice but to do so. Only by going all out could he fight his way out. In fact, he could even benefit from it and obtain more benefits. How could he not take some risks when he had so many plans? You are indeed powerful. So what? Mo Jiu shouted angrily and punched out at the same time. At this point, Mo Jiu no longer had any fear in his heart. In fact, from his point of view, this battle was already in his grasp. Therefore, he couldn't help but feel a little conflicted. He had roamed the world for so many years. When had he ever been looked down upon by a few juniors? How could there be no ripples in his heart? As Mo Jiu's fist smashed down, it seemed to affect the destiny of the heavens and earth. There was even a feeling of good fortune coming from the heavens and earth. The surrounding power gathered on its own and condensed on the fist. As a result, the Yin flame on his fist continued to shrink, but the killing intent contained in it did not diminish at all. Instead, it became even stronger, as if it was unstoppable. In an instant, the atmosphere became extremely austere. Boom! Pipa! The power of the two began to collide. Immediately, all sorts of strange sounds rang out. The sounds of explosions and annihilation could be said to rise and fall one after another, causing one's scalp to go numb. However, looking at the situation, Xiaoyang was still suppressed a little because his fist aura could not hurt his opponent. However, there were always some Yin flames that slipped through the net and continuously smashed onto Xiaoyang's body. Although the Yin flames were deliberately obstructed and could not cause terrifying damage, it was still a headache to cut flesh with a blunt knife. In the end, The two of them punched each other, and Xiaoyang flew out like a kite with a broken string. It was impossible for him to resist at all. Mo Ju did not seem to be in a good state either. His expression and breathing were both stifled. However, it only lasted for an instant before it returned to normal. It was as if nothing had happened just now. In the previous exchange of fists, Mo Ju indeed felt an extremely strong rebound force. It even made him feel as if his bones were about to fall apart. However, because of this, he also received more information. His opponent was indeed very strong, but he had also reached the end of his road. Putting aside the fact that a sick tiger had lost its fangs and claws, even its own power had been greatly reduced. What kind of storm could it stir up? Mo Ju stroked his beard and appeared to be happy and content as he spoke. He had also recovered the style of a family head, happy and content. Xiaoyang fell to the ground. Just as he stood up, he spat out a mouthful of blood. He also suffered quite a bit of force, and his internal organs were also displaced. The Yin flames that seemed difficult to deal with were not too bad. They only burned a few holes in his protective will and burned some wounds. The flames had the intention of cutting flesh with a blunt knife, so it had to be done slowly. Sometimes the damage did not seem that impressive, but if it kept stacking, it was still quite terrifying. Xiaoyang's breathing also became heavier. He realized that if they continued to fight like this, he would definitely lose. Therefore, his gaze landed on Princess Mingzhu and Bai Jian. However, no matter how he looked at it, it did not seem suitable for them to continue fighting. Therefore, it was almost impossible to get their help. Moreover, even if they forced themselves to fight, their foundation might be damaged. Thinking of this, the pressure on Xiaoyang's shoulders became even greater. It seemed like he was too abrupt in this fight and did not plan enough. Although Xiaoyang knew how terrifying the raging river was, he did not expect that they would be in such a terrible state after breaking the raging river. When the sandpiper and the clam fought, the fishermen would benefit. Since Princess Mingzhu and Bai Jian could not be sold, Xiaoyang naturally had no other choice. He could only fight. Although he didn't have much strength left, he still had to give it a try. If it really did not work, he would find another way. Even if he wanted to escape, he had to think of a way out first. After all, Mo Ju finally seized the opportunity, so how could he let them escape so easily? As he thought about this, Xiaoyang's thoughts began to become clearer. Now, I finally understand why those top geniuses have shorter lives. In the end, it's because they walk too fast and are too arrogant. They feel that they are invincible, so they are not afraid of anything. Even when they know that they are in a trap, they still want to be arrogant and throw themselves into it without hesitation, Mo Ju said and laughed out loud. If the three of them really became cautious and did not act so arrogantly, how could he have such a chance? He probably would not have a chance at all. Chapter 2766. So even though your cultivation is higher than ours, you still act like a scoundrel. No matter how you look at it, you won't be able to go far with such despicable thoughts. You deserve to be stuck at rank 6 for thousands of years without being able to break through. With your character, you wouldn't even be able to match a rank 5 cultivator. Although Bai Jian could no longer fight, he didn't stop talking. The more Bai Jian thought about it, the angrier he got. He was actually taken advantage of by a scoundrel. No matter how he looked at it, it was a great loss. However, Bai Jian wasn't lying. After all, there were only a few rank 5 cultivators in the Four Realm Alliance. Most of them were here. Although Li Fengmu relied on the Horned Dragon's inner core to forcefully break through to rank 5, once old Sword Master became ruthless and wielded the Heavenly Sword, it wasn't impossible for him to defeat Mo Ju. Thinking of this, Bai Jian looked at Xiaoyang in confusion. The Divine Emperor and Sword Master Li had already made preparations in the flowing cloud realm. As long as he activated the formation and used the mountain river map, he would be able to bring these two experts over. So, what was a single Mo Ju? Princess Mingzhu angrily sat there to control her injuries and recover her spirit power. As for why Xiaoyang didn't bring Sword Master Li and her father over, she understood. If the In-Flame realm sent experts to ambush the Four-Realm Alliance at this time, no one would be able to stop them. At that time, even if they killed Emogio, the Four-Realm Alliance would suffer heavy losses. Although they could also slaughter the In-Flame realm cultivators to vent their anger, their own people were gone. They wouldn't be able to come back. Moreover, there were only so many good seedlings. More than half of the mainstays had been lost in the last war. If the remaining ones were to die in battle, it would take hundreds of years or even thousands of years for the vitality to recover. They would have to stay in their own territories and wouldn't dare to leave for even a moment. Although they had supported the Four-Realm Alliance, they wouldn't be able to do it forever. Brat, you're really noisy. At this point, you still have the guts to say such things? In a moment, this old man will let you know what methods our In-Flame realm has. Emogio said with a trace of ferocity in his eyes. Hearing these words, how could Emogio not have any ripples? However, an old fox like him knew that if his state of mind fluctuated too much, it would only give the other party an opportunity. The other party was also good at scheming. Previously, he was just blindly confident. Right now, their minds were probably already spinning 1,000 times, and they had already thought of all the possibilities. Even if there was the slightest chance, he would grasp it firmly in his hands. Therefore, taking down the three of them steadily and surely was the best plan. Moreover, there was no reason for him to be anxious now. The ones who should be anxious should be the three of them. Once a person starts to panic, they will lose their mind, and this will cause flaws to appear frequently. Having seen too much of the ways of the world and experienced too many battles, the current Emogio would not make any low-level mistakes. There was no such thing as coincidence or luck that he was able to reach where he was today. Back then, he was also a ruthless character who had fought his way out of the southern battlefield. Right now, his state of mind was indeed not comparable to when he was young, but he had also become much calmer. Every time he made a move, he would be careful and calculate clearly. He would almost never make a mistake. I've always been like this, unlike you who watched your own children and grandchildren die one by one and did not dare to help. You stood by the side and watched coldly without any humanity to speak of, Bai Jian mocked. In response, Emogio only snorted coldly. It was not that he did not feel heartache. Later on, he even wanted to enter the formation, but he was stopped by the spirit of the raging river and could not do anything. Now Emogio understood that the spirit of the raging river was right to stop him. Otherwise, how could there be such a great situation in front of him? You can only be stubborn. Right now, I'm afraid you can't even lift a sword, Emogio said in disdain. Hearing this, Bai Jian was instantly enraged. As anger attacked his heart, a line of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth, as if he was in great pain. Seeing this, Emogio was even more delighted. This brat wanted to use words to anger him. In the end, he caused internal injuries from anger. On the other hand, Princess Mingzhu was silent. She was still constantly withdrawing her remaining spiritual power and began to accumulate power. There was no point in saying more. It was only a waste of time. If she could make a decent slash, she might be able to create an opportunity for Xiaoyang. Resigning oneself to fate was never Princess Mingzhu's style. Moreover, she also had some methods that she had not used yet. She just needed an opportunity. You're really not going to invite my Grandmaster and the God Emperor over? Bai Jian asked using a secret technique. Xiaoyang only nodded in confirmation. After all, once bitten, twice shy. They had previously announced that they would come to the In-Flame realm. Perhaps the other party was very clear about the details of the Four-Realm Alliance. If there was no one guarding there, once something happened, the consequences would be unimaginable. Hearing this, Bai Jian did not speak anymore. Since there was no hope, he could only rely on himself. I can make another slash. As for when I can finish accumulating power, that's still a problem. Bai Jian continued to speak, using a secret technique. Xiaoyang also nodded. As long as Bai Jian could continue to attack, there was still a chance for them to fight. They were both existences that refused to admit defeat. How could they give up just because they were almost exhausted? In the next moment, Xiaoyang waved his hand. Immediately, his remaining power erupted once more. Since the two of them were accumulating power in secret, he could only go up and block Mo Jiu so that he would not be able to notice them. Mo Jiu looked at him coldly. At the same time, he also felt that although the woman seemed to be dead, she had begun accumulating power again. Clearly, she wanted to continue the battle. If this drags on, they might really recover some of their strength. If they work together, their situation might become critical because of this. Thinking of this, Mo Jiu suddenly let out a low shout. Immediately, countless amounts of cold aura flowed out of his body and turned into flames. You want to stall for time like this? I won't agree, Mo Jiu said coldly. After saying that, the cold aura became even heavier. It was so oppressive that it was difficult to breathe. Even some of the flowers and trees in the surroundings were covered in a layer of frost. In the next moment, they began to burn. The color was strange. It looked extremely strange. In Wrath Hand. Chapter 27:67. Mo Jiu roared angrily, and the Yin flames burned even more vigorously. However, the chilliness also became even more moving. It was as if a layer of frost had formed in the world. Everything that entered his eyes became blurry. It was all those flames that burned here. It was probably the case for the world to be frozen. Even a rank 5 powerhouse like Bai Jian started to be moved after being attacked by the chilliness. Due to the cold, even his teeth started to chatter. Even Bai Jian found it difficult to resist such a chilliness. Bai Jian's physical body was not known for its toughness. In fact, compared to Xiaoyang, he could be described as weak. In addition to the sword aura that went out of control and penetrated his body was like a leaky wall. Countless chilliness kept entering his body, causing him great pain. Mo Jiu laughed out loud when he saw the kid's pitiful appearance. That guy deserved it. Sometimes he had to pay a price for doing something he didn't want to do. Xiaoyang was still able to resist by relying on his spirit, but he also felt his hands and feet turn cold. At the same time, he did not dare to be careless. If he was infected too much by the chilliness, his meridians might become blocked because of it. In the next moment, Xiaoyang took out the Thunderfire Divine Sword. Immediately, flames rose. The sword was a spirit weapon, and the scorching aura that it emitted was not ordinary. However, in this icy cold environment, he was completely suppressed. It was simply impossible for him to contend against it. However, the trace of warmth was still able to calm a person's mind, and he would not be trembling all the time. Princess Mingzhu had many tricks up her sleeves, and she had even more weapons. It was unknown what method she used, but it was as if she was not affected at all. In this short period of observation, Mo Jiu had already figured out the situation. The most arrogant person was probably the real pushover. Currently, he no longer had any momentum and could even completely ignore him. As for Xiaoyang, there was no need to mention him. He had always been unusually dauntless. Furthermore, he was the backbone of the 3 people and could not be underestimated. If they couldn't kill him, everything would be in vain. As for the woman, although he couldn't tell how strong she was, she still looked like she was accumulating power. It was enough to see that she still had a backup plan. She might even be able to pose a threat to him. Therefore, Mo Jiu was already very clear on how to fight next. After a short moment, Mo Jiu's hand also began to move. As the hand seal condensed, the aura also became increasingly strange. It was impossible to tell what was going on. However, because of that, the oppressive power became even more ferocious. It was as if it wanted to directly crush the 3 of them. However, other than Bai Jian, who could no longer withstand the pressure and was lying on the ground, Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu were still as immovable as a mountain. It was as if this little bit of suppression was nothing to them. They just had to accept it calmly, and there was no need to think too much. Xiao Yang did not dare to stay idle. He continuously poured the spirit energy in his body into the divine sword, causing the flames to burn even more vigorously. However, in front of the Yin flames, the Yang flames were still somewhat outnumbered. This was originally a place where the Yin flames were rampant, while the Yang flames were like a lone lamp in the darkness. It couldn't illuminate much of the place at all. Perhaps a strong gust of wind would directly extinguish this small spark of fire. Thinking of this, Xiao Yang also smiled bitterly and helplessly. The current situation really put him in a difficult position. If there was a better solution without any worries, Xiao Yang would definitely use it. However, it was a pity that although they seemed to have prepared a lot for this operation, it also seemed to be a bit of a storage. However, some information needed to be investigated with lives. However, how could the current Four Realms Alliance bear such a risk? Therefore, all they could do was to feel their way through the river. If they wanted to use lives to fill in the gap, like Mo Jiu, he couldn't do such a thing. Go to hell! Mo Jiu shouted angrily and immediately stretched out his hand. Immediately, the Yin flames turned into a huge claw in an instant and grabbed at Xiao Yang. Xiao Yang's heart could not help but tremble when he saw the gigantic claw. This was because he could feel how terrifying the power contained within the claw was. If he was caught unprepared, he would probably die in the end. How could Xiao Yang not know this in his heart? Therefore, he was very determined. The divine sword in his hand shook. Immediately, the countless flames turned into sword energy and shot out. He wanted to directly destroy that huge claw. Thunder, thunder, fire, plunder. Thunder, sword, chi, and fire, sword, chi, surged out like carps crossing the river. It was dazzling. Unfortunately, although the sword energy looked tyrannical, it shattered when it came into contact with the claw formed by the Yin flames. However, Xiao Yang turned a blind eye to it. He continued to rely on the endless sword energy to charge forward as if he wanted to determine who was stronger. An arrow on the bow must be released. Moreover, the arrow had already been released. Naturally, there was no turning back. Although Bai Jian was lying on the ground and couldn't see the situation, he could sense it clearly. He couldn't help but tighten his grip on his sword. This guy still doesn't care about his life as usual. However, most of the time, Xiao Yang only looked like he didn't care about his life. He was only using this method to probe his opponent's situation. Once he got the information he wanted, it would be the end of the road for his opponent. On the other hand, Princess Mingzhu frowned slightly. Although the two of them had yet to truly clash, she could feel that Xiao Yang's stubbornness to charge forward would only lead to his defeat. How could Princess Mingzhu not be moved when she thought about this? Their situation was already terrible. If something were to go wrong, the consequences would be unimaginable. Thinking about this, Princess Mingzhu was even angrier. This Xiao Yang was truly reckless this time. Although Princess Mingzhu wasn't sure what Xiao Yang was thinking, she couldn't just watch the situation worsen. After all, if Xiao Yang really fell, then the three of them could only wait for their deaths. Although big risks were accompanied by big returns, sometimes you would take all the risks without seeing any returns. Therefore, Princess Mingzhu no longer hesitated. A ray of sword energy flashed across her hand. Chapter 2768. The sword light didn't look very bright, but its speed was very fast. In the blink of an eye, it flew past Xiao Yang's side and directly rushed towards the Yin flame claw. Boom! When the small sword came into contact with the claw, it suddenly exploded. Immediately, an incomparably terrifying power flowed out and began to bombard the power of the Yin flame. Mo Jiu suddenly felt a pain in his palm, and the way he looked at the woman changed again. That woman was really doted on, and her means were endless. The small sword that she threw out was not inferior to the all-out attack of a rank 6 powerhouse. Therefore, at this moment, his martial technique was completely destroyed by the sword essence contained in the small sword. Without the claw blocking the way, Xiao Yang's speed became a little faster, as if everything was within his expectations. The lightning was fast, and the flames were fierce. Seeing Xiao Yang rushing towards him, Mo Jiu couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He immediately cursed in his heart, but the speed of his hands was extremely fast. He constantly waved his hands, and countless scattering flames were gathered by him again, forming a new line of defense. Now, Mo Jiu also recognized the power of these three people. They seemed to be telepathic. This kind of cooperation really caught people off guard, and it was even impossible to guard against. However, it was a pity. If they were in their peak condition, this kind of cooperation could indeed make Mo Jiu helpless. But now they couldn't continue, and it was impossible for them to threaten him. Countless flames rushed out one after another, like countless malicious spirits attacking, and the wind howled. Xiao Yang didn't think of a way out for himself, so he still rushed forward, ignoring the malicious spirits that seemed to be baring their fangs and brandishing their claws around him. Under the crisscrossing sword aura, countless flames were slashed apart, but at the same time, there were some that slipped through the net and continuously attacked Xiao Yang's body. Even though Xiao Yang had the support of his will, he still found it hard to bear the impact of the attack. However, no matter how painful it was, he could only grit his teeth and endure it. What's more, at such a critical moment, if his heart softened even a little bit, he might end up bringing a nightmare to himself. How could Xiao Yang not know what was more important, and what was more important? Qi. The sword in Xiao Yang's hand pierced into Mo Jiu's body at an inconceivable angle. Mo Jiu also looked down in a daze. He was still in a daze. He didn't understand what was going on. However, in the next moment, when Mo Jiu sensed the boundless sword intent gushing into his body, he let out a furious roar and directly slapped out with his palm without showing any mercy. Bang! There was a muffled sound mixed with the crisp sound of something breaking. Xiao Yang was once again sent flying and fell to the ground. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Mo Jiu lowered his head and looked at the wound on his chest. There was still a lot of sword qi wreaking havoc. He gritted his teeth and grunted. Immediately, he suppressed the sword qi with great strength. The sword qi was indeed terrifying. If he allowed it to continue wreaking havoc, his internal organs would be greatly impacted, and he might even be severely injured in the end. Mo Jiu dared not take such a risk. Moreover, his opponent had calculated so precisely that it was as if he was playing with his life. If he were to succeed, there would be endless trouble in the future. Xiao Yang fell to the ground, and blood flowed out from his ears and nose. The power of the palm had almost caused all of his internal organs to be torn apart. Moreover, the bones in his chest had been broken, and his flesh had been burned until it was blurry. Xiao Yang's body began to spasm uncontrollably as the intense pain attacked him. Princess Mingzhu, on the other hand, stood up shakily. She knew that Xiao Yang's situation was probably similar to theirs after being hit by this palm. His combat power might be greatly reduced because of this. If she still did not stand up, she would probably be killed. She did not want to die here. It was only a fight to the death, so what was there to be afraid of? Even if she had to fight to the death, even if she had to destroy her great path foundation and ruin her future, she had to do something. After all, no matter how well you protected some things, they would be gone if you died. Those things would only be useful when you were alive. Otherwise, everything would be in vain. Good lad, good plan, Mo Jiu said, and his chest heaved up and down. Mo Jiu was about to lose his mind. He was forced to this extent by two juniors who were almost exhausted. It was difficult for him to remain calm. When had he, Mo Jiu, been beaten to such a sorry state? Moreover, they were two juniors. However, no matter how good your plan is, it's useless. Exhausted means exhausted, Mo Jiu said angrily. Xiao Yang stood up shakily. and the smile on his face showed a hint of helplessness. I said before that even if the three of us are exhausted, it's more than enough to kill you, old man, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Although there was no possibility of winning after careful calculation, they were very ambitious. However, they were extremely ambitious. As long as they dared to make a move, there would be a chance for them to succeed. So what if they were almost exhausted and could not make a decent slash? As long as they slowly wore them down, there would be a chance. Xiaoyang also had a way out. It would not be too late to seek revenge after they recovered. It would be safer. However, if they did that, the great momentum that they had built up with great difficulty would be broken. This was not a situation that Xiaoyang wanted to see. If they could do it in one go, why would they ask for more? If they really could not do it, Xiaoyang would not hesitate to open the Caesar Grotto heaven and let the three of them escape into it. You still dare to speak such arrogant words, even at this sort of time? It would appear that you all are truly out of breath. Do you all think that you're still capable? Maggio said angrily. He had no idea where those people's confidence came from. This wasn't something that could be changed just by talking. His Mo family had paid such a huge price just to kill 3 fifth-level cultivators. If they could not do that, it would be the biggest joke. This was a great situation that had been created with the lives of powerful cultivators. How could it be turned around so easily? If he, Mo Jiu, was the one who kicked the door, there would be no problem at all. Thinking of this, Mo Jiu felt that he had to kill one of them first. This was to prevent any mishap from occurring, or to prevent these people from escaping. It could be said that if one of the three left alive, they would definitely come to seek revenge after they recovered. Knew he was suppressed, and all the elites in the sect were killed. He, Mo Jiu, had no other support. Black Flame Extermination. Chapter 2769. Mo Jiu's current state of mind was completely covered by killing intent. He did not care about what technique he was using. So what if it consumed a lot of spiritual power? As long as he could kill them, it was enough. In the end, a powerful technique would require a vast amount of energy to support it. Moreover, so what if he consumed most of his power? No matter how one looked at it, the other party did not have any backup. Therefore, as long as he eliminated them, everything would be peaceful. Then, he would spend some effort to clean up the mess. Under his leadership, the Mo family's forces would have a chance to return to their peak glory. At this moment, the atmosphere was tense to the extreme. As killing intent was revealed, the atmosphere became very subtle. It was as if a small spark was enough to cause an explosion. In such a situation, Bai Jian suffered greatly. He lay on the ground, and his limbs began to tremble uncontrollably. It was as if death was right in front of him, and he was at the end of the road. Princess Mingzhu even relied on the support of her sword to barely stand there. As expected of a veteran powerhouse, he's so terrifying when he's angry. If he had fought us head-on from the beginning, we would have probably died in the raging river, Princess Mingzhu thought and sighed. However, things had already developed to such a stage, and there was no point in thinking too much. Therefore, they could only fight. Princess Mingzhu also knew that her accumulation of power could only go so far. This sword would definitely determine the winner and the loser, as well as life and death. Even Princess Mingzhu knew that even if she attacked with all her might, she would not be able to change the outcome. However, she still had to attack. Lightning Prison True Fire Kill. Xiaoyang frowned and roared furiously. Instantly, his aura became even more tyrannical. Now he had no choice but to use his most powerful killing move to compete with him. Thunder rumbled. Flames roared. Mo Jiu turned a blind eye to the thunderbolts around him that carried heaven's might and continued to unleash this attack. This was because, to him, it was not the time to hesitate. If he only thought about protecting himself all the time, he would probably only be in a situation where he would be beaten up forever. This was not the result he was willing to see. Countless flames surged out of his body, as if they were real, like a magnificent army, rushing toward Xiaoyang and the other two. Xiaoyang was the first to bear the brunt. Not only did he not retreat in the slightest, he even took the lead and launched an attack without any fear. The flames burned even more vigorously, as if they were the wrath of a god. Xiaoyang couldn't retreat either. If he didn't block all the power from the front, Princess Mingzhu and Bai Jian would be heavily injured or even die. Therefore, for the sake of the companions behind him, he had no reason to retreat. Even if he had to bite the bullet, he had to do it. A mantis trying to stop a chariot? You're overestimating yourself. You brat, do you really think you're the savior of the world? Don't worry, you will all die. Mo Jiu shouted angrily. Xiaoyang turned a deaf ear to him and continued to charge forward. A sword light flashed by. It was another small flying sword. Princess Mingzhu brought a lot of trump cards for this battle. She even prepared a few flying swords that were comparable to a 6th-level martial emperor expert's attack. However, this kind of consumption was not going to end. She was already stretched to the limit. However, she had to do this. If she let Xiaoyang take all the power, he would probably die. Therefore, it was within her power to wear down some of the power. At the same time, Princess Mingzhu slashed her last sword. Massacre of golden light. A golden sword chi descended from the sky as if the heavens were angry and sent down divine punishment. Mo Jiu took a look and couldn't help but feel frightened. That was because he could sense that this sword intent was many times stronger than before. Obviously, it was the woman's all-out attack. Speaking of which, they didn't have any hope in the first place. They could only place all their hopes on the all-out attack. If it succeeded, there was still a way out. This way, you can't kill me. Mo Jiu laughed. Mo Jiu held up the sky with one hand. Suddenly, countless power surged up, forming an unstoppable momentum. It collided with the huge golden sword chi without any scruples. The small sword had already exploded, tearing a hole in the attack that was like an army of thousands of men and horses. At the same time, Xiaoyang's sword slashed towards the gap. That was the path that Princess Mingzhu opened for him. It was also the only feasible path. He had to try it. The two types of flames with completely different attributes started to fight again. For a moment, it could be said that it was difficult to distinguish the winner. However, Xiaoyang was soon drowned in the thousands of soldiers and horses. Countless attacks launched an extremely fierce attack on his body without mercy. Xiaoyang didn't care. He gritted his teeth and continued to charge forward. Looking at the two of them fighting with their lives, Mo Jiu sneered. The situation is like this. No matter how strong you are, you can't turn the situation around. Mo Jiu was still continuously increasing his strength. He wanted to use this move to kill all three of them here. The golden sword light fell, and the Yin flames were cut apart layer by layer. How could an all-out attack be simple? It could be said that Princess Mingzhu's body didn't have the slightest bit of power. She had poured all her power into it. She wanted to take a gamble and see if she could kill her way out. Your efforts are useless. Mo Jiu held up the sky with one hand and pointed forward with the other. The power in his body was still surging out. It could be said that this was an unreasonable battle of pure power. On the other hand, Mo Jiu was biding his time. So wouldn't it be extremely easy for him to deal with these three juniors that were practically exhausted? Accidents might happen if he used other methods. However, he definitely wouldn't do this. Although the sword light was still falling and getting closer to his head, the speed at which it was being worn down was also very fast. The golden light dimmed in an instant. Mo Jiu didn't need to take a look to know that this battle had come to an end. Everything was over. They were definitely no match for it. So what if Xiaoyang was still bitterly holding on? How could it be possible for him to block such an attack with that little bit of power? Mo Jiu turned a blind eye to the lightning around him. Even if he was hit a few times, it didn't matter. He wouldn't die anyway. It's over. Mo Jiu watched as the golden light dissipated. Before he could finish his sentence, he felt a chill in his heart. He felt an extremely strong and sharp sword intent attacking him. Heavenly Sword Path. Chapter 2770. Before Mo could finish his sentence, he immediately felt an extremely sharp sword aura coming towards him. Furthermore, he had already locked onto it, and it was right above his head. After the golden sword aura disappeared, a ray of sword light descended from the sky. He did not expect that the golden sword light was just a cover. The sword aura that followed closely behind was the real killer move. However, in the blink of an eye, Mo rejected the thought in his heart. This was because he could sense that Bai Jian's aura had only soared at this moment. It was obvious that this was a last-minute attack. How could the speed of a sword slash be so fast? As such, it was indeed hard to figure out what had happened for this to happen. What a fast sword! What a sharp sword! Mo did not dare to think too much. He immediately retracted his power in an attempt to block this incomparably fast and sharp sword. If he was really hit by this attack, he would probably suffer a great loss. He might even be unable to turn the situation around. However, the speed at which he mobilized his strength was not as fast as the sword chi. Those seemingly solidine flames were as brittle as a piece of paper under the sword chi. They had no effect at all. Even if he wanted to slow down the sword chi, he couldn't do anything. A lingering sound was heard. The sword light had already penetrated Mo's head. Furthermore, it continued to charge downwards as if it wanted to split him into two. In an instant, half of Mo's heart turned cold. He had never imagined that the power of this sword would be so terrifying. Even he could not block it. At this moment, the thunderbolts continued to attack, causing Mo to wail in agony. In the blink of an eye, Mo felt the world spinning as if everything had changed. Xiao Yang's sword had exhausted its power in order to block the yin flames that were surging towards it like a flood. It could no longer charge forward, and even had to endure the destruction of the rampaging power. However, a smile flowed from the corners of Xiao Yang's mouth, because he knew that the outcome of this battle had been decided. Sometimes victory and defeat could be decided in an instant. No one could predict it. Even so, life and death could be decided. The yin flames were like a completely berserk beast as they rampaged around. They were the most ferocious when they weren't being held captive. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, stood there motionless. It was as if he was prepared to bear all of this power without any hesitation. If he were to fall, Princess Mingzhu and Bai Jian behind him would most likely be affected. Compared to Xiao Yang, their bodies could be said to be extremely weak. If they were injured again, their vitality would be greatly damaged. Princess Mingzhu could only borrow the power of the mysterious yellow jade to temporarily help Xiao Yang share a portion of the pressure. However, because of her limited spiritual energy, she couldn't share much of the burden with Xiao Yang. After Bai Jian unleashed that sword strike, he fell down once again. It could be said that that shocking sword strike was the last sword strike he unleashed in this battle. If they still couldn't kill Majiu with this, then they would die. After a long time, the violent energy slowly dissipated. Xiao Yang was still standing there, but there was a numbness in his eyes. It was as if he was already lifeless. The ghastly white bones that could be seen in front of his chest made people tremble with fear and tremble with fear. If a child saw such a scene, they would only think that it was a Jura hell and would be horrified. It was even possible that it would leave a nightmare for a young soul. Majiu looked in front of him numbly. The three youths who were almost at the end of their lives were instantly filled with grief. Until now, he still couldn't understand why he was defeated. Everything was clearly under his control. With such a great advantage, everything went down the drain in an instant. Even his life couldn't be saved. Why? Majiu muttered in a daze. No matter how he thought about it, it was completely impossible. It was as if he was in a dream. Even if he was dreaming, he wouldn't dare to do this. However, the wisps of sword aura that kept seeping out of his body made Majiu have to admit that this was reality. The power of that sword strike was so strong that it shattered Majo's sea of consciousness in an instant. Countless vitality was wiped out. The remaining vitality was also constantly disappearing under the killing of the remaining sword aura. If he was facing a cultivator who was one realm higher than him, Maggio naturally wouldn't find it strange that such a sword strike was made. However, the other party was one realm lower than him. How could the sword aura of the jade-faced youth be so powerful? It was completely unreasonable. One sword strike cut off all of Maggio's vitality. I said that you will still die. Xiao Yang smiled bitterly. In this battle, the price they paid was also not small. The current victory could only be said to be a narrow victory. If it wasn't for Bai Jian's shocking sword strike, even Xiaoyang would have to find a chance to escape and not continue fighting. Fortunately, the three of them were not ordinary people, and their cooperation was flawless. That was why there was such a heaven-defying reversal. Ma Jiu smiled bitterly and helplessly. How could he have thought so much? If he hadn't experienced it personally, if someone else had told him all of this, he would probably be dumbfounded and even suspect that the other party was exaggerating to fool him. However, the reality was not like that. Why? Maggio asked again. All along, Maggio had cherished his life very much. He would almost never participate in a battle that he wasn't completely confident in. This time he felt that as long as it wasn't a fool, he could easily win. However, he only knew that the other party was not an ordinary cultivator, but he didn't expect the other party's strength to be so terrifying. Xiao Yang grinned, and immediately pitch-black blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Now he was just holding on with one breath. Once he went limp, he would fall. How long would this fall take? All of this was unknown. However, at least they were not out of danger yet, so they couldn't fall. Maggio suddenly thought of another possibility, which was that the three of them were probably on par with each other in terms of strength. It was just that their styles were different. Bai Jian's performance at the beginning was sharp, but later on he didn't use his sword at all in front of Flying Cloud Mountain. He didn't even have any achievements in the Furious River. Maggio suddenly smiled. At the same time, his vitality was completely exhausted, and he fell just like that. An ambitious person of a generation, after 1,000 years, finally ended up like this. Chapter 2771. Mo Jiu never thought that he would die in such a humiliating manner under the joint attack of 3 exhausted juniors. With Mo Jiu's fall, it could be said that the entire Mo family's forces had completely collapsed. The raging river was suppressed, and the strongest family head was killed. Without a backbone, the monkeys naturally scattered when the tree fell. Although some people found reasons to leave this troublesome place when the war began, they were still in the minority. Because no one would have thought that the Mo family, which had been glorious in the in-flame world for tens of thousands of years, would completely collapse with a single sword strike. Most of the people who had not left were terrified at this moment because they felt that the sky had fallen. Since the other party came aggressively and had already done so much, there was naturally no reason for them to let them go. Most of them were unable to react because of the series of events that had happened. After seeing some of the facts, their mentality exploded. They were even more terrified of these 3 outsiders. Xiao Yang cast a meaningful glance at the Mo family's courtyard. Indeed, there were still quite a few people there. Their strength might not be that strong, but their numbers were still relatively large. Although some people began to quietly escape, there were still a large number of people who did not leave. Some were scared silly, and there were probably many people who had the intention to fish in troubled waters. However, there was one thing that was certain. The Mo family's route, the raging river, had been suppressed, and the family head had been killed. This meant that the Mo family's roots had been continuously broken. Perhaps even the trunk had been completely chopped off. Naturally, these branches would not be able to do anything. However, that was a matter for the future, or it could be said that it was an internal matter of the in-flame world. The matter at hand was not over yet. After Princess Mingzhu rested for a long time, she forced herself to stand up. She looked at the man in front of her. Although he still trembled from time to time, he was still so stalwart. It was as if as long as he did not fall, there would be no threat to their lives. At the same time, Princess Mingzhu also glanced at Bai Jian. This person was indeed worthy of the phrase, showing off his ability. Even now, Princess Mingzhu still had lingering fear from the might of that sword strike. However, staying here all the time did not seem like a good idea. Xiaoyang took a deep breath and said in a ridiculing tone, "We have already used up the last of our strength to kill your Mo family head. Right now we can't move at all. Any high-level cultivator from King Wu can kill us." There were still some remaining forces in the Mo family's courtyard. Although they were not sure about the situation of these three people, they understood that they could observe them for a while. If there really was a chance, then they could kill their enemies with their own hands. It could be said that the Mo family's power had declined in the hands of these three people. Countless ancestors had lost their lives here. How could they not remember such a deep blood feud? Some of the hot-blooded people observed carefully, hoping that it was as Xiaoyang said, that any random high-ranked martial monarch would be able to deal with them. However, since the other party dared to speak so openly about this matter, then perhaps this was not the case. Perhaps this was a deliberate trap to send them to their deaths. How powerful was their patriarch? They thought that they had a chance, but what happened in the end? They only lost their lives. The more they thought about it, the more pain they felt in their hearts. With your temperaments, how can you accomplish anything if you're so paranoid? In my opinion, you might as well jump into the raging river and drown yourselves. Xiaoyang continued to mock them as if he was not afraid of the matter getting out of hand. As soon as these words were spoken, many cultivators in the Mo family's courtyard were filled with anger. They could not wait to rush out and kill this arrogant kid. Although they had such thoughts, they did not have the heart and courage to do so. There was a huge difference between thinking about it and actually doing it. Who did not know how to think about it? However, it was not easy to do it. Moreover, who would not want to risk their own lives? If he were to rush over now, under such an uncertain situation, he was afraid that he would only end up dead. Princess Mingzhu still did not say a word. At the same time, she was not careless and began to think about this problem in her heart. They had broken through the raging river and killed Mo Jiao. This could indeed intimidate the remaining forces in the Mo family's courtyard and make them not dare to act rashly. However, the moment the three of them made the slightest mistake in their response, those fellows would probably swarm over and kill them in the name of revenge. They would fight until the sky turned dark and the earth turned dark. Princess Mingzhu was naturally not afraid of these cultivators before. Even if she was alone, she could easily suppress and even kill them all. However, under such circumstances, it was a little difficult. So, you are not angry and no one dares to rush up and kill us? Speaking of which, before the fight even started, you all retreated again and did not dare to fight. Now that those who have some strength in the sect have died in battle, some trash naturally do not dare to have any thoughts. Xiaoyang continued to mock them. It was as if he would not stop until he provoked the other party to attack. The situation was in a stalemate. However, there was still a young and aggressive person in the Mo family who could not tolerate it anymore and stood out. This person was called Mo Lu, and he was Mo Jiao's great-great-grandson. He had already been suppressing his anger when he saw his ancestor being killed. In addition to this provocation, he could not continue to watch from the sidelines. Mo Lu was also different in some aspects, and that was that he was more cautious. He felt that the other party was just bluffing. If the other party really had the strength to spare, he would definitely kill them all. Why would he have so much nonsense to say? As for those who were scared out of their wits and did not dare to show themselves, there was no other way. As long as he went to find out the other party's background, he would naturally know what to do. Seeing that there was really someone who dared to stand out, Xiaoyang's lips curled into a strange smile. He was afraid that no one would stand out. At the same time, Xiao Yang gripped his divine sword tightly. He sensed that the other party was only a first-level martial emperor. He was very confident that he could kill him in one blow. Although Xiaoyang could not unleash a shocking slash like Bai Jian's, he was very confident that he could kill a cultivator whose cultivation was too far apart, even if his vitality was greatly damaged. Killing the chicken to warn the monkey was like this. As long as the first person who stood out was killed decisively, the others would naturally be afraid and would not dare to come again. However, before Xiaoyang could make his move, there was a burst of light behind him. A black shadow swept past him at an extremely fast speed. Chapter 2772. Mo Lu had just stepped forward, and before he could say anything, he saw a black shadow charging at him. Furthermore, the shadow was growing bigger and bigger. Mo Lu was dumbfounded. The other party was probably bluffing to intimidate them before leaving. However, what was going on with such an attack? The corner of Xiao Yang's mouth twitched. He naturally knew that it was Princess Mingzhu's attack. Furthermore, this attack was not simple at all. She had directly thrown out a flying ship. As expected of the God Realm's genius, she was extremely wealthy. She was really willing to take out such a treasure to deal with a mere rank 1 martial monarch. That flying ship was personally refined by Princess Mingzhu. If she threw it at him, it would naturally not be able to kill him. Next, Mo Lu punched a hole in the airship. While he was puzzled, his confidence was boosted and he rushed over. This way, he was even more certain that the other party was indeed exhausted and had used up all her tricks. Now was the best time for revenge. This was also a great opportunity that the Mo family had risked their lives for. Naturally, they could not miss it. However, after Mo Lu charged into the flying ship, he was trapped by the array. In an instant, Mo Lu realized that this was not normal. However, when he prepared to leave, it was already too late. The airship exploded with a loud bang, and a powerful shockwave swept out. Even the Mo family's courtyard in the distance was affected by the shockwave. Although the flying ship could not directly kill Mo Lu, the power contained within was enough to blast him to pieces. Xiaoyang shook his head with a pained expression. It was true that the God Realm was so rich that they dared to squander it like this without feeling any heartache. Princess Mingzhu, indeed, did not feel any heartache. After all, she really did not care about these things. In the end, these were just external objects. Moreover, it was not difficult for her to refine the flying ship. It was just something she casually did in her free time. There was no need for her to take it to heart. A flying ship in exchange for her safety. No matter how one looked at it, it was worth it. When the many cultivators in the Mo family's courtyard saw this scene, they all trembled with fear. In the end, Mo Lu would only be sending himself to his death. He would be able to clear up a lot of problems. The other party was just trying to provoke them with words. Soon, some people couldn't withstand the pressure and began to slip away from the back. They didn't dare to stay in the Mo family's courtyard any longer. If they stayed here, the final outcome might be death. In that case, how could they dare to stay here for a moment longer? As some people began to flee, many people began to lose their composure and began to flee outside. They didn't even dare to look towards the south for fear that they would be targeted by those 3 fellows and lose their lives in vain. Come quickly. If you wait any longer, I'll recover my strength. Then you won't have a chance. Xiaoyang had a shameless look on his face, as if he was really thinking for them, and kept talking nonstop. These words sounded like they were for their own good. But the people of the Mo family were not fools. There were too many bloody lessons in front of them. So how could they not take it to heart? Many people were even scared out of their wits. How could they still dare to fight with them? Princess Mingzhu remained silent. At the same time, she sent out a second flying ship. If the other party still didn't know what to do, then she would continue to throw it. Anyway, she had plenty of Dharma treasures on her. Although it was inevitable that she would be suspected of wasting Dharma treasures, she didn't care. As long as they could leave this place safely, it was enough. What did other things matter? Sometimes the risks were not even worth mentioning. Drifting Cloud Realm Middle Peak. The God Emperor looked at a jade pendant and frowned even more. His expression was extremely solemn. This expression made Li Fengmu, who was watching from the side, extremely worried. He could already read a lot of information from the God Emperor's expression. The God Emperor must be so worried because the battle wasn't going well. However, Xiaoyang still hadn't opened the entrance for them to go over. This made Li Fengmu feel a little strange. He couldn't understand what was going on. Could it be that the three of them really wanted to take on all the important tasks? What happened? Li Fengmu asked anxiously. After the God Emperor finished reading the message, he shook his head and said it was a narrow victory. It could even be said that our lives were hanging by a thread. Fortunately, we won. Although the God Emperor didn't know the exact situation, he could understand from the description of the message sent by his daughter that it must have been a desperate situation. Li Fengmu stomped his feet anxiously and said, "The three of them were too risky. The reason Xiaoyang didn't ask us to go over is probably because he's afraid that the other party has a backup plan in our world. That's why he didn't dare to take us over," the God Emperor said helplessly. Back when the three of them were fighting against Xingtian, there were experts from the mysterious dragon tribe stationed outside. They could attack at any time. Although Xingtian lost, he also said that he would restrain the other tribes. However, could the myriad beast realm be trusted? If they attacked at this time, the four-realm alliance would fall completely in no time if the God Emperor and Li Fengmu weren't there. Sometimes it was necessary to leave some backup plans. Otherwise, the losses would be unimaginably severe in the end. Take the last time as an example. Xiaoyang and the other two were far away in the myriad beast realm. Even if they retreated in time, it was difficult to avoid the consequences of serious losses. Once bitten, twice shy. That's our fortune, the God Emperor sighed. Sometimes it was better to be calm and steady. Nothing would go wrong. If they knew the other party's situation like the back of their hand, they wouldn't have any scruples. However, the current situation wasn't like that. Therefore, they had to think a little more and leave some backup plans. Li Fengmu still looked a little dissatisfied. He strongly disapproved of the reckless actions of the younger generation. Moreover, in Li Fengmu's opinion, the three of them were the future of the four-realm alliance. If anything happened to them, there would be no future to speak of. Sword Masterly, don't worry too much. Don't worry too much. When did Xiaoyang disappoint us? When did Bai Jian disappoint you? The God Emperor said with a smile. Li Fengmu frowned. Thinking about it this way, it was indeed not bad. Xiaoyang had always taken every possibility into account. Since he didn't plan to use them, he must be confident. As for Bai Jian, Li Fengmu was still very worried. This kid had always been arrogant, and his sword qi was the sharpest. An overly sharp sword was often easy to break. Therefore, how could Li Fengmu not be worried? Chapter 2773. In the Yin Flame realm, it could be said that a storm was brewing. It would not be an exaggeration to say that the realm was filled with mourning. In a short period of time, there had been many rumors since the three people from the Four Realms Alliance entered the realm. In the beginning, it was only on the surface that people were panicking. Mo Wu brought a few experts to stop them outside the realm, but they fled before the battle. They even lost a fifth-stage expert and became a joke. It was also after this news spread that some cultivators in the central and southern regions were panicking. Fortunately, the Mo family did not use their true strength to deal with them. Therefore, many people thought that the Mo family was deliberately holding back and luring the enemy in. They were setting up an inescapable trap. Later, the Sun brothers fought for justice and ended up dying. However, they still felt that it was not a big deal. The other side had an additional fifth-stage expert, so it was normal for them to win. They did not panic because of this. Therefore, no one cared about this matter. They just wanted to see how the Mo family was going to deal with this matter since it had escalated to this point. Later, There was the defeat of the Flying Cloud Mountain. Even a mountain was taken away. Many people began to panic, but they did not start to panic. After all, everyone knew that the Mo family's bottom line was the Furious River. It was their foundation and also where their strongest killing move was. It could be said that the Furious River was an inescapable trap. The facts proved that it was indeed so. The Mo family bet their last confidence on the Furious River. However, in the end, the Furious River was suppressed by the Flying Cloud Mountain. Even the Mo family's patriarch, Mo, was killed in the subsequent battle. As a result, the Mo family's forces completely collapsed. Almost all cultivators above the second stage Martial King realm were killed. None of them survived. Under the collapse of the Mo family, there were bound to be a lot of resources that could not be defended. However, the surrounding forces did not dare to fight for it because they knew that if they did, only death would await them. With the collapse of the Mo family's forces, almost the entire central region began to fall into chaos. Almost every force was afraid. At the same time, they were also very afraid. If the three people started to cause trouble for them, even the Mo family would be gone. What would their small forces amount to? He probably wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps between other people's teeth. For a time, many mighty figures began to flee. They did not care about the situation in the central region. Leaving this place was the wisest thing to do. After all, the abilities of those three outsiders were truly terrifying. They were existences that couldn't be provoked. There were some disasters that could be avoided, so it was naturally a good thing. After all, they had such a large territory. It would take some time for the other party to come over. Moreover, after they left, the other party couldn't possibly look for them everywhere. As the forces in the central region fled, the entire Flame world began to panic. Everyone was in danger. After all, the other party had declared that they were here to settle the grudge of the previous invasion. How could they let it go so easily? The other party was only in a fit of anger right now. If he could avoid it now, he would naturally not let it slide. There were also many cultivators who weren't afraid of death. But because they didn't have a leader, they became a pile of loose sand. Of course, they were afraid from the bottom of their hearts. If the other two supreme experts stood out and called for help, they would immediately submit. However, the problem was that the one in the west had been silent. The one in the Fire Assembly Union was in seclusion. Under such circumstances, what could they do? There was a difference between not being afraid of death and dying meaninglessly. If they could use their lives and blood to exchange for the lives of those three, they wouldn't hesitate. This was also the difference between the Flame world and the Myriad Beast world. The Wansho realm was almost always for their own benefit. Sometimes the collapse of the general situation was because their thoughts of self-interest were too serious. That was why it happened. In addition, the two supreme experts who were still alive didn't make any sound. This made the hot-blooded cultivators think that they were afraid. If even the leader was afraid, what reason did they have not to retreat? Seeking luck and avoiding calamity was the instinct of every cultivator. Since things couldn't be done, they could only take a step back and protect themselves. This storm could be said to be extremely huge. Everyone began to feel afraid, but there was nothing they could do. The only way was to have a hard fist. As long as you were strong enough, you wouldn't have to worry about these things. At the same time, some strange voices began to appear. If Mo didn't gather the army to invade the Four-Realm Alliance, today's disaster wouldn't have happened. Regarding Mo, there were some changes in the tone. He was the sinner of the Flame world. He was the abominable person who caused this situation. After all, the Mo family had already fallen. Mo was also a dead man. There was naturally no problem in pushing all the blame onto a dead man. As for the remaining members of the Mo family, they were nothing more than stray dogs. What could they do? There were even forces that were bullied by the Mo family. They treated the remaining members of the Mo family as street rats. They constantly mocked and rolled their eyes. There were even some who wanted to settle old scores. Of course, this was only the minority. They knew very well that this storm wasn't over yet. Internal strife was the worst thing to do. In the end, the only ones who would be pleased with themselves would be the three outsiders. Although the Assemble Fire Union didn't help the MO family on the surface, they still had spies observing the situation. After all, when they invaded the Four Realm Alliance, the Assemble Fire Union also took part in the invasion. And Joe had even sent out his beloved son, all for the sake of giving him a bit more credit. However, he didn't expect that he would lose his beloved son in the end. It could be said that the Assemble Fire Union was most afraid of the demise of the MO family. The gap between the Assemble Fire Union and the MO family wasn't very big. Even the Assemble Fire Union fell under the swords of those three people. How could the Assemble Fire Union be spared? Thinking of this, and Joe kept pacing back and forth. He was very worried. Moreover, they also received news that the airship of those three people continued to head north. Obviously, after destroying the MO family, they were preparing to deal with the Assemble Fire Union. The people here all revealed a difficult expression. They all understood that the following battle was unavoidable. However, the Union Master was still in seclusion and there was no news. This was even more unacceptable. Chapter 2774. In the beginning, they were happy because they had taken over the Four Realms Alliance, but now they were helpless and bitter. In the beginning, when the Assemble Fire Alliance heard that the Four Realms Alliance would retaliate, they didn't think much of it. It was just a usual threat, and it didn't count at all. With the other party's strength, it was already very difficult for them to wipe out their army. If they wanted to retaliate in their territory, wouldn't they be courting death? However, with the demise of the MO family, they had to face this problem seriously. If they still looked at this problem with their previous view, they would probably become the second MO family, heading directly to destruction. With the previous example and the MO family's full preparation, they still ended up like this. If they still didn't take it seriously, they would be really stupid. What can we do? And Joe asked with a wry smile, thinking of the pain of losing his son. And Joe also wanted to rush out and take revenge. However, his reason told him that brute courage was meaningless, and he might even lose his life in vain. Everyone present looked at each other. If they could come up with an idea, they wouldn't be sitting here. They would have gone out to do something. How could they let those three outsiders swagger in? At the same time, they also found it hard to understand. Those three guys were only Fifth Order Martial Kings, but the ability they showed was even stronger than the three strongest experts of the Assemble Fire Alliance. This was indeed somewhat unreasonable. Could it be that the three of them were the reincarnations of some almighty experts? Was that why they were so terrifying? Or could it be that the Four Realms Alliance was very tyrannical and everything was just an illusion? There were too many assumptions and ideas, which made them feel deeply helpless. Sometimes things were never easy to understand. This was also the reason why the entire Enflame world was shocked. The other party was only 3 Fifth Order Martial Kings. Although there weren't many Fifth Order Martial Kings in the Enflame world, it was still not a small number. At least, it was 10 times more than them. When Joe saw that none of them had opened their mouths to speak, he immediately felt a headache coming on. Could it be that this matter could be dragged away without saying anything? Since the matter was already in front of them, they naturally needed a solution. Since Xiaoyang defeated the rank 6 Xingtian, there's no need to doubt his strength. It wouldn't be a problem to say that he's a quasi-rank 6. An elder who looked more sinister said. However, the crowd laughed in disdain. Wasn't that just nonsense? Over the past few days, they had gone through all the information over and over again in order to find some mistakes that could be used to kill Xiaoyang and the other two. In the past, they had felt that some of the news was exaggerated, but now it seemed that it was the truth. Therefore, I feel that Xingtian will definitely hold a grudge against Xiaoyang after losing to him, the old man continued. Everyone still didn't take it seriously. Wasn't this human nature? If that's the case, why don't we make use of this? Since we were able to join hands with the Wanshou realm thousands of years ago, Why can't we join hands again to deal with the Flame realm? The distribution of benefits will be the same as the last time we joined forces, said the sinister old man. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone's expression changed. This was indeed a way. Brother Huangwu, you have a good idea. This is indeed a way. If the Wanshou realm is really willing, I don't believe the Four-Realm Alliance can do anything about it. A middle-aged man echoed. The sinister old man just stroked his beard and smiled. And Zhou also nodded. If they could join hands with the Wanshou realm, it wouldn't be impossible to take down the Four-Realm Alliance. It seemed that this was the only way to turn defeat into victory. When the time comes, the Wanshou realm will directly invade the Four-Realm Alliance. At that time, as long as we withstand the pressure and avoid fighting, the other party will naturally become a stray dog. And Zhou said, gritting his teeth. Everyone understood tacitly that such a method was indeed feasible. I have a disciple in the Wanshou realm. You can immediately send a message and let him do this. A burly man said. Everyone nodded one after another. This matter couldn't be delayed, so it was naturally better to make a decision early. If they knew earlier and had a plan in mind, then some things would naturally not be a problem. Then we'll have to trouble Brother Cheng. And Zhou said. The man who was called Brother Cheng just smiled, indicating that he would do his best. After all, this was a matter of life and death. How could they be careless? If they weren't careful, their entire fire-gathering alliance might be directly destroyed. If there were more problems, it wouldn't be good. Since they could join hands with the Wanshou realm 10,000 years ago due to benefits, they could do the same now. Moreover, with their previous alliance, it would only be easier to achieve this. After all, the benefits that they each ate before were real. Everyone risked their lives to invade other worlds. Wasn't it all for benefits? If we really avoid fighting, I'm afraid we'll only be laughed at by others. Huang Wu said, after all, they could retreat, but the mountain gate couldn't. If we can ask that person from the Falling Flame Mountain to bring a group of mighty figures to support us, we might be able to fight them. Huang Wu continued. Everyone raised their eyebrows. They were naturally aware of this. It was just that if the Falling Flame Mountain was so easy to invite, Mo Jiu probably wouldn't have risked his life in the furious river and ended up dying. Perhaps the Falling Flame Mountain would be happy to see the Fire-Gathering Alliance destroyed by outsiders. Only then would they be able to dominate the Flame realm. People's hearts were sinister. This was not something impossible. Everyone had a tacit understanding. If their fire-gathering alliance and the Falling Flame Mountain situation were reversed, they might also choose to do so. However, doing so would inevitably lead to a situation where they would be criticized by everyone. Within the next 100 years, many people would criticize them behind their backs. This was indeed a good choice, but it was still somewhat inappropriate in the end. After thinking about this point, and Zhou's heart also had a glimmer of hope. If this was used as a threat, perhaps the Falling Flame Mountain would have to agree, even if they didn't. Make a trip to the Falling Flame Mountain and invite them again. This time, bring generous gifts and promise them that as long as they're willing to help, we'll try our best to satisfy whatever resources they want. And Zhou made a prompt decision and said. Everyone was stunned for a moment at first, then immediately nodded. It was indeed so. So what if they gave up some resources? Even if they gave up some territory, that was also fine. Being able to win, that was the most important thing. Chapter 2775. Xiaoyang and the other two stood in front of the furious river for a while. The people of the Mo family began to flee. After no one dared to attack again, Princess Mingzhu took out the airship and flew up. Since there was no danger of the storm, then they could have a good rest and recuperate their condition. After all, the current situation was really bad. If he didn't quickly recover his vitality, who knew what else would happen? It was hard to say. Xiaoyang, on the other hand, raised his white sword and landed on the flying ship. As soon as he landed on the airship, Xiaoyang directly fell down. His aura became very weak and he fainted. Princess Mingzhu could only throw the mysterious yellow jade to Xiaoyang to help him stabilize his injuries for the time being. She and Bai Jian couldn't care about Xiaoyang now. They could only take elixirs and begin to recover. Now they were all clay bodhisattvas crossing the river. They couldn't even protect themselves, so how could they care about others? It was also because she still had a little strength left. What Princess Mingzhu could do was to use the mysterious yellow jade to temporarily protect Xiaoyang. She would make a plan after their injuries had recovered. In order to show their momentum so that those rascals couldn't see any clues, Princess Mingzhu could only brace herself and let the airship move forward slowly. As long as the airship was still moving forward, it was enough to make many cultivators with ulterior motives afraid. The other party did such an illogical action, so it must be able to explain many problems. If they didn't have the strength to move forward, how could they dare to do this? Therefore, the movement of the airship was the last straw that overwhelmed the cultivators in the central part of the Yin Flame realm. Even though they had many calculations, they still didn't dare to risk their lives in the end. A day later, Princess Mingzhu and Bai Jian stabilized their injuries one after another and began to recover. On the contrary, although Xiaoyang had the mysterious yellow jade to protect his body, his current situation was still not optimistic. There was still no sign of waking up. After being seriously injured, it was the wisest thing to use sleep to warm the soul and body. Moreover, Xiaoyang had suffered too many injuries in the battle. In the end, he even blocked Emojo's all-out attack alone. It was already not easy for him to survive. It was also because his physical body was strong enough that he was able to survive. If it were her or Bai Jian, they would have lost their lives long ago. Princess Mingzhu stood up and walked to Xiaoyang's side. Looking at his broken ribs, she could not help but frown. This man really did not care about his own life. Princess Mingzhu did not waste any more time. She immediately took out some pills and fed them to Xiaoyang. Then she took out some powder and sprinkled it on the burnt meat that seemed to have dried up. Everything was done in an orderly manner, without the slightest hint of panic. Bai Jian lay by the side and watched silently with a smile on his face. It was such a beautiful scene. It seemed like what Brother Wushuang said was true. These two were a match made in heaven. Although Xiaoyang isn't as good-looking as me, he's still passable. I can't say that they're a perfect match, but the two of them are very compatible. Bai Jian thought to himself as a smile bloomed on his face. Regarding the review of the previous battle, Bai Jianfan was not that anxious. Instead, it was the marriage of his best friend that was worth paying attention to. Speaking of which, it seemed like there was no other person who could be compared to Princess Mingzhu in the 3,000 hours. One relied on his own efforts to reach the peak, while the other was a lady favored by the heavens and had her own style. No matter how one looked at it, they were extremely compatible. All of a sudden, Princess Mingzhu turned around and saw Bai Jian's ill-intentioned smile. She immediately frowned and asked, "What are you smiling about?" Bai Jian instantly felt a chill in his heart, and his mind was in a trance. "Nothing. I think it's great that I'm still alive, so I'm smiling," said Bai Jian. Although everyone could see the relationship clearly, women were thin-skinned, after all, and there were some things that could not be said openly. Once it was said, it would be meaningless. By then, if she flew into a rage out of humiliation and caused a scene that could not be resolved, it would only make things worse. Therefore, it was naturally best if they could nip the seeds of the matter in the bud. When Bai Jian thought about how he took the big picture into consideration, he was rather pleased. Princess Mingzhu glared at Bai Jian and said, "You might as well take care of your own situation." Bai Jian also nodded immediately. Then he turned around and entered a meditative state. Princess Mingzhu did not know how much this guy was thinking. After settling Xiaoyang down, she sat down cross-legged and prepared to continue recovering from her injuries. However, when she thought about Bai Jian's strange smile, she felt that it was a little strange. Could it be that there was another meaning? Bai Jian had always been a little strange and did not seem reliable, but the shocking sword slash at the end was something that no one could have expected. They only knew that they could trust their companions, but they never thought that Bai Jian's sword would be so powerful. Suddenly, Princess Mingzhu stood up, and the sword flew directly into her hand. In an instant, Bai Jian did not care about how serious his injuries were, and immediately stood up as well. At a glance, a group of cultivators was rapidly approaching. Looks like there are still some blind people who insist on coming over to be unlucky. Bai Jian sneered. Speaking of which, how could there not be a few people with brains in such a big flame world? However, when they came yesterday, Bai Jian really could not do anything. However, after a day had passed, things would be different once he caught his breath. Moreover, from the aura that the other party emitted, Bai Jian could determine that the highest realm among them was only a 4th-level martial emperor. They are people who are here to spy on us. They are here to die. Princess Mingzhu said softly. Bai Jian only nodded when he heard that. If the other party really sent a 5th-level martial emperor, they would probably have a hard time fighting. As for the strongest person who was only a 4th-level martial emperor, that was not enough. Take care of your injuries. Leave these bastards to me. Princess Mingzhu said softly. Bai Jian nodded at first, but then he was stunned. Princess Mingzhu was really unwilling to pass on her responsibility, as if she had a lot of grievances that she wanted to vent. Princess Mingzhu stood at the bow and looked coldly at the cultivators in front. She said, "If you continue forward, you will die." The other party did not reply and continued forward. From the looks of it, the other party was not traveling without knowing anything. They met by accident and deliberately came to find trouble with them. Chapter 2776. This group of people was indeed a force planted in the central region by the Assembly Fire Union, and Zhou and the others pondered for a long time and felt that no matter what the situation was, they still had to test it out. If Xiaoyang and the others' lives were really hanging by a thread and they happened to miss this great opportunity, it would be too late for regrets. If they only speculated and analyzed the situation of the other party, they would naturally not be able to come to an accurate conclusion. Therefore, as long as they fought, they would know how capable they were. If the time was right, so what if the Assembly Fire Union sent out all their forces? As long as they could kill the 3 outsiders, there would still be room for them to turn things around. It would not be a problem for them to raise an army and take down the 4-realm alliance. If they missed this great opportunity, it would be too late for them to regret it, and they would have an even bigger headache. Bai Jian looked at the group of cultivators that rushed over and did not take it to heart. Instead, he dozed off at the side as if he was not very concerned about this matter. The strongest was only a 4th-level martial emperor. With Princess Mingzhu's ability, she could easily deal with them. Even though they were no different from a sick tiger now, it was not a problem to deal with these people. After Princess Mingzhu rushed out, she did not speak anymore. Suddenly, the light of treasures circulated around her body, and she continuously smashed out one after another. If it was in the past, Princess Mingzhu would not take such a troublesome matter. She would be able to kill all the enemies with one sword. However, it was different now. She could only use these weapons to end the battle quickly. When the scouts of the Assembly Fire Union saw the numerous weapons smashing toward them, they could not help but panic. How did this woman, who used to be so domineering with her sword, suddenly change her fighting style? She actually used a magic tool to smash people. This was really unexpected. However, this also made them certain that the other party had suffered heavy losses in the battle with the Mo family. There were not many people left, so she used these methods. These guys still think that they can take advantage of it. Princess Mingzhu usually does not use weapons to attack because she wants to train her cultivation more. Bai Jian sneered. The God Realm was known for its many methods and weapons. Princess Mingzhu had always used one sword to fight her enemies, and that was only because she was demanding for her own strength. If she really used all of her magic tools, then she was not to be underestimated. Not long after, Bai Jian heard a lot of wails. At the same time, he shook his head helplessly. These guys were really here to sacrifice their lives for justice. Of course, it was because they were brainless. Otherwise, without a Tier 5 powerhouse holding the fort, who would dare to probe the situation? If this wasn't courting death, then what was? The last time they were in the myriad beast realm, they tried their best to conceal themselves. Why? What he needed was a surprise attack, catching the other party off guard. And now he was swaggering in the Inflame realm, all for the sake of killing people. It could be said that if more people came to stop them along the way, more of them would die. With the passing of countless mighty figures, they would be the ones who would be afraid when the time came. If he could break their courage, then the purpose of this trip would be achieved. He wasn't afraid that no one would come to stop them, but he was afraid that they would make the same choice as the Mo family, placing all their bets on one place. In the Raging River, if it wasn't for Xiao Yang's inspiration to take out the Mo Jade Lotus to turn the situation around, they would have drowned in the Raging River long ago. In less than a cup of tea's time, the whales in front stopped abruptly. That white-clothed girl also returned to the flying ship unscathed. However, exhaustion could still be seen on her face. Although it was easy to kill those scouts, it was still quite exhausting for Princess Mingzhu to use her magical tool to fight. Princess Mingzhu is amazing. You took care of those blind guys so quickly, Bai Jian said with a smile. That white-clothed girl glared at the jade-faced man, as if she didn't have the intention to speak. Then she sat at the side and continued to heal her injuries. Next, they were heading north, and their target was the Gathering Fire Union. The difficulties they would face would probably increase. Furthermore, the atmosphere between the Gathering Fire Union and the Mo family was different. The Mo family was the dominant force, so they could do whatever they wanted. On the other hand, the Gathering Fire Union was different. They had many mountains, and many mountains were united. Although it was difficult for them to gather together, it would cause them quite a lot of trouble if they went their own ways. Princess Mingzhu was rather helpless about this. Fortunately, they attacked the Mo family first, so this matter could be put aside for the time being, and there was no need to be too worried. It was actually a good thing for them to go their own ways, as at least they could defeat them one by one. It seemed like it was acceptable no matter how one looked at it. On the contrary, it would be the most terrifying thing if many powerhouses joined forces and became whole. Moreover, Princess Mingzhu had to think about some things, such as the situation that they might encounter later. The Gathering Fire Union probably had a big mountain guarding formation too. Once they fell into it, the consequences would be immeasurable. The fact that they were almost defeated in the Raging River was the best proof. If they continued to encounter the same situation, they would really be stupid. After all, they couldn't fall twice in front of a hole. Bai Jian looked at the gloomy sky and frowned again. He was also thinking about the same problem. After all, there were many troubles in the world. So how could it be so easy to think clearly? However, his current state of mind was indeed so gloomy. He originally thought that he would be able to show off his skills in the Inflame world, and it would even be smooth sailing. Who would have thought that the Inflame world's foundation was not bad? This was also the reason why the Inflame world could fight against the Wanshou world for thousands of years, but only fell into the southern battlefield. If they didn't have some real ability, how could they be entangled with the Wanshou world for thousands of years and form a solid situation? Looking at Xiaoyang again, he was still in a coma, and there were no signs of him waking up. This caused Bai Jian to feel even more helpless in his heart. Right now, this backbone of his was lying there as if he was playing dead. What should he do next was really giving him a headache. Even though the strategy had been set at the very beginning, the situation had been constantly changing, so the plan naturally had to be changed to a certain extent.